We'll do a short 15-minute summary to follow up from last week. And that is that we're in the middle of the discussion here of how moichin, how the mind, how the intellect trains and sublimates and refines the emotions, the midas. Because all this is part of the process of the interface of how a world like ours, which is driven by the yesh, by self-interest, by a person, everyone feeling me, myself, how that becomes a keli, a container to receive something higher. So essentially, moichin is the middle place, with the middle ground, where divine meets earth. Because moichin has the ability to weaken and allow the midas, the emotions and the feelings to become receptive to this idea. So there's a long discussion about the difference, the way it is Lamaila in the spiritual worlds, the difference between Tayo and Tikkun, between the world of chaos and where the energies don't tolerate each other and the containers don't give and take from each other, the Midas Doim and so on. And now is in the discussion how that applies and psychologically to us personally in the difference between moichin and midas, meaning in the world of Tayu, midas are those midas that are raw, untamed, wild, unbridled. In Tikkun, those midas become weaker, meaning they don't have that same intensity, is because the mind and the intellect is training them and sublimating them. So that's the discussion. In that itself, the Rebbe Rashab continues and discusses the process of how the intellect develops in a human being in 3 stages of Ibur, Yunika, and Meichin. I discussed a chapter for each one of those. Ibur, the stage of pregnancy, gestation, where there the child is all wrapped up, and the main power, the primary force is Nihi, which is just action, functionality. And the Moichin and the Midas are both there only as far as a process of helping that functionality develop. The second stage, well, that means in psychological terms, it means it's a stage where the intellect is not really in power. The emotions are the intense force. But it's a beginning of some, there's ktsas meichin, as he put it. There's a little intellect in there, but it's more of of action oriented. So there is some discipline. A child in the womb, and the same thing in Aveda, when we're on the womb-like stage, there is some discipline, but it's on a minimalistic level. Then comes stage number 2, which is called Yunika, where there the moichin begins to develop and emerge, but it's all still in connection and in proportion to the emotions, and therefore also, which is interdependent with the idea that the moichin is thinking there not about the divine that's beyond existence, but it's the divine within existence, and therefore it's still not the ultimate bittul, the ultimate selflessness and nullification or weakness of the midas. The midas are still, the emotions are still intact and very strong intact. Then comes stage 3, moichin. And here, the hisbonenus, the meditation, the contemplation is on the level of divine that's beyond the world. And here the moichin are in full power. And he explained this is the difference between the time of Golus and the time of Geula, of the Zman HaBayis. The Beis HaMikdash moichin radiate, and in Golus, it's mainly Yunika or Ibur. And then, no, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that in this Maimer. That's speculation. This Maimer talks only between Zman HaBayis and Golus. Okay, yeah. Now, then he sums it all up. The context of the fact that that Chochmah is ultimately that interface. So we see from this that Chochmah is the interface, because in Chochmah has the bittul, has that selflessness that the midas don't have. The midas, as we said, were driven by self. Chochmah, wisdom, has the power of that type of selflessness, because in it rests Erein Sev Baruch Hu. So it's that mamut. So therefore, that Chochmah, the Meichin, has the ability to influence and refine. Yeah, but let me do the summary, then we'll...
Okay, finish up.
Now we're up to now with the period that we're concluding or middle of learning is more detail of how exactly that klishus, how exactly the weakening or the diminishing of the intensity of the midas takes place. So here he's talking about how moichin actually impact the dynamic, how moichin actually impact the midas. So, briefly, he began like this. The question is, from where does ma'ayin bobehem achlishus? From where does the midas get this weakening? You can't say it comes through the seichel, because the seichel, as we said, is mislabish. It manifests inside the midas. It's not forcing them. It's not like rotzen. It's not like willpower that dominates and rules over the emotions, telling them what to do. Seichel educates them. Since it educates, so the midas and the midas on their own are very intense. So where do they get weaker from? In a way, moichin and midas are like a contradiction to one another. So how does moichin cause that weakness in the midas? If it does it by force, we can understand. It's more powerful. But moichin doesn't do it by force. It does it in the form of islapshus. It enters into it. He said that we discussed it earlier at length. That it enters into it, it trains it, and so on. So to dissect that further, the Rebbe Rashab goes on in this period of creation and ches that the truth is not complete islapshus. And he just separates between two elements of how the mind affects the midas. One part of it, yes, is islapshus, but there's a part doesn't require hisaskus, as we put it. The word hisaskus. What's hisaskus? Hisaskus means that you're actual really training, where the thing is like, let's say, a student begins one way and a teacher trains the student. Here, as he explained, the maturity process happens no matter what. B'derech memela. So it's not like through the years of a child developing that the mind is actually sitting like in a classroom and training the midas. No matter what, everybody's going to mature. Whether they'll act on it is another story. So basically, the mind's relationship with the midas is like in between. It's not by force, but it's also not completely like a mechanech, like an educator. So all that just leads back to the question, so then where does the weakness come from? If it was by force, it weakens it. If it's bislapshus, in some way, you cannot say that it weakens it. So here's where he concludes that it has to say that it doesn't come from the mind itself. That there's some other force that travels, that the mind is a conduit for, that ultimately causes the weakness. And what is that? The elokus, the divine. And this brings us back ultimately to the real interface. In other words, it's not just, let's say, take away God from the picture a moment, the divine.
Oh,
1 second. So then you have moichin and midas, you have a fundamental problem. In other words, let's talk psychology here a moment. Right. If you take, for example, Freudian psychology, okay, so you take Freudian psychology where definitely the midas are full force, and you have what he calls the id, and it's all me, and the mind is a force that evolution developed to keep us at bay. Right. It's like red lights and green lights. But the motions, really, you still remain an animal forever and ever. You still remain an animal forever. You still remain a selfish animal. Which really means that the mind didn't do anything with the midas. It just controlled them for a while. Push comes to shove, it didn't do anything to the midas.
So are you saying that
hold on.
God and soft midas don't have a klishus?
They do have a klishus, but it's not them. It's not right. It's not really right. It's not really. Because the mind itself, in this scenario, where midas are just raw midas, this is what he's asking. How do they get weaker? Which really means, do they really get weaker? Maybe they don't. Maybe they're just being forced to fake, so to speak. In other words, it's like a person. For that moment, they're sublimated, but there's no real bitter, which goes back to the interface. That means you really are not affecting this world. So the world remains a grobish yesh, no matter what happens. Now what? You force it. Or you don't force it, or meichin has some effect on it, but it's not complete. If you take away the divine, there's no question what you end up having is either one or two scenarios. Either you cut out emotions and you become this type of like a Zen-like Buddhist, Meich Shal Ta'alev, thing, and the midas are not really functioning. Really meaning you're not really tapping into the midas. You're just controlling them in a good way, or you just force them down and you just don't let them act at all. So it's either Moichin is dominant or midas are dominant. There's no real refinement going on. Let's put it this way. There's no thing what we call birur hamidus. Right. You're born, like he said, midas, the way you're born with, that's how you are forever. The question is, that's the mitzias ha'elam. The yesh is a yesh no matter what. That's its nature. The question is, how is this yesh ever going to change? And still within the gedder of being a yesh. You don't want it to change that it loses its personality. So if you don't, let's take away. If you take away moichin, then the only way is by forcing the midas down, which is complete slavery essentially. If you use moichin and there's no alakus, so then the midas really do not really change, and they remain who they are, except the moichin is glossing over it for a while. It's like a person who's controlling themselves for a few minutes because it's a pasnish or whatever, and then you let him loose, like the story with the cat, and then he's back to his own thing. You need the combination of moichin and alakus for the midas to be who they are and be trained and actually be refined. That's the bottom line. Which is the critical. In other words, that's when moichin becomes a memutza between alakus, the divine, and the yesh. So again, just to say it again, I'm saying it for myself as well, that with moichin alone is a contradiction to midas. Midas are intense. They're like in Tayu. Tayu is natural midas. And in Tikkun, the midas are weaker, and they're weakened by simply the mind's dominance, whatever. It doesn't change the midas. If you take away moichin and you only have the divine, the rotzen, keser in other words, then the midas are just slaves altogether. So it's a different way, not the midas. So the only way that you need is a combination. Because the moichin speak to the midas, so to speak, gently. The alakus is what creates the bittul, which creates the chlishus of the midas. And once there's the chlishus of the midas, the moichin can come and train those midas to become more refined. That's what he says. So the ayin, that's what he answers the question. How does it really get weaker? Because that's the thing. Well, we know that moichin speaks to midas. But what makes the midas weaker? On their own, they're not weak. And the moichin doesn't have the power to weaken them. So it has to come from some other level that moichin carries. So moichin is doing two things when it speaks to the midas. One thing is bringing a lakus that weakens the midas, don't be so loud. So listen. Basically, it brings midas into the room. And moichin, once you have it in the room, moichin starts training them. And that's going to be the second level where he's going to say about the kelim of tikkun, that they masakin, the iskaulos. Because remember, all this is about being savil one another. Remember.
There's no direct connection between the Elokus and the midas, in other words. It's always the mamutza of...
No, listen, the shadish, we learn midas and the root, their intensity comes from divine. It's like Esav.
Yeah, but not to change it.
Remember, right. So they're potentially their power is very, but to change it, no. And on their own, it's like ein chavish mater satzme. A person who's in prison cannot free themselves. A midah is subjective. A midah cannot say, I cannot look at itself from outside. It only sees its interest. So it has to have something outside, like almost like an objective judge or mashpia that guides it. We said the difference, for example, between sheftayich and yetzayich, or between Rav and a chaver. Aseh lecha Rav v'knei lecha chaver. That a Rav is more of authority. A chaver is more closer to you. Like a friend. It's advice. A Rav gives you a command. A shefet is an authority. A yeyitz is an advisor. So basically, you need all of that. But the key is, if you want it to be a slapshus, that's what he says, the moichin is a slapshus in the midas. You don't want the midas to be forced. You need them to be educated, or else you don't have dira b'tachtein, or else you don't have the divine coming into the midas. But the key thing that he's leading up to is that this, remember, we're talking about the two aspects. There's one of the eris, the energy. So the energy of Tayu doesn't tolerate one another. In Tikkun, because the moichin, through the moichin, weakens the intensity of the midas, so they tolerate one another. But that still does not create iskalos. That doesn't mean that they're giving and taking from each other. That's going to come the next part, where you talk about how the kelim of Tikkun Amasakin repair the kelim of Tayu. So if it's up to with all of you, I would continue from middle of Tov Kuf Chav Beis. We'll go over it again.
basically, Meichen can affect Midas without the Ayin and Miti shining in Meichen. Meichen cannot actually affect Midas, right?
I'll start from L'cheda Ein Moving, correct.
Excuse me, Rabbi Jacobson. Mr. Yaffe apologized he can't be here today. He drove early this morning.
Tell him his apologies are duly noted.
Okay.
Unaccepted.
Last night, though.
Yeah.
Is the Eidus is the fusion of the midas, or it's just tolerance of one another?
Depends. He says the Eidus of the Atzilus of Tikkun is the tolerance. He said clear. Sevel says Sevel, the Eidus, and Kalim is the Skalus. Mashpia Makabel Zem is that. That's befedish. That's clear. He's going to go back to that soon. We're still all in the middle of the Eidus, and he's finishing up this subject. So let's start from L'cheda Ein Moving. It's like 15 lines from the top. Tavkuf Chav Beis. So basically, he summed up now that the mind and the midas have an interesting relationship. It's not force, but it's not total hisaskus. There's a slapshus and there's no hisaskus. What that means is that there's a natural maturity process, and that's not a total slapshus as of, let's say, a teacher training a student in a particular way. On the other hand, it's also not bal karchach, it's also not forcing it. And therefore, so this leads us, so since it's happening naturally that the midas are being sublimated by the meichin, so the ched is not understood since the midas, the emotions, are on their own intense energy, compared to the meichin, so why is it that when the meichin become intense, the midas get weaker, get bottled, get nullified and weaker? So if meichin was rotzen like a melech, so that it's ordering the midas to be weak, but that's not what meichin does. Meichin doesn't order. Meichin does manifest in a slapshus way. On the other hand, you see Meichin does the effect on the midas b'derech hamel. It's not hisaskus. Because if Meichin was actually training it like a teacher, you could say it comes from that. It weakens it like a teacher weakens a student's resistance, so to speak. But he's saying that Meichin does not hisaskus. It's a certain natural maturity process that as a child comes from 2 years old, from 1 year old, 2 years old, let's say to 20 years old, their natural certain Meichin grow, even if the child doesn't work on it, and naturally the midas get weaker. Simple example. A 1-year-old will have a tantrum, a 20-year-old won't. This has nothing to do with Aveda. This is not about Aveda. Simply a natural process of maturity. So maturity, the minimum maturity, even if you're a person who has no Aveda, Nefesh Abamis is full intensity, a person even a Bal Aveda, but there's a natural maturity that takes place. So the question is, where did the midas get this weakness from? It's not coming from the meichin. It's not coming from themselves. So where is it coming from? So the answer is, like this. Okay. So that's the l'cheda Ein Moving. Go ahead. Now another question. V'gam eicha meichin peil memel shlei b'derech hishlapshus. Meichin hein pnimi. Like he said, since the meichin how are the meichin peil? It's a second element to the same question, but it actually makes it even stronger. Remember, meichin is not rotzen, so it's not a makif like a king or authority forcing itself upon the midas. It's pnimi. Meichin is pnimi. Since meichin is pnimi, how does it peil? How does it affect automatically on the midas? So if it was training the midas, if it was training them, then that would be the effect. But it's not. It's memela. So it's like almost a contradiction of terms. So think of it like this. Meichin and midas are both eres pnimim. Kesed or rotzen is an makif. So an makif has the natural dominance over pnimis. It can force itself upon. You could, like, for example, like he brings the Shulchan Aruch, and the Chassidus brings it, some of other places. Even though a person naturally is hungry, but if you have a tainus kolim, if you have a bad dream and you decide to fast, it says on Shabbos you're allowed to fast because that becomes your tainug. But the natural tainug of a human being is to eat. But your ratzon, your will, because you feel you need to fast for whatever reason to repair the dream, the bad dream, that dominates over your natural desire to eat. So that's understandable. We see it every time, every fast day. Yom Kippur. It's not like naturally you want to fast, but your ratzon says today's Yom Kippur, Yom Kaddish. So you get hungry, you even feel hungry, you even feel pain, could be. A person can tolerate pain if they want to. But that's not that the midah changed and suddenly you don't like to eat. It's being forced and being like told, now you don't eat. That's it. That's discipline. That's ratzon. Meichen, on the other hand, is a pnimi. And like midas is a pnimi. They're equal to each other. I don't mean equal that one. Of course, meichen is more powerful in disciplines than midah. Midah is more powerful in its intensity. But since it's a pnimi, so how is it training it? So if it was training it like an education, mamish b'saskus, it's one thing. But it's b'derech mamela, it's happening that the midah is getting weaker as we get older. And on the other hand, meichen is pnimius. So where's the pnimi? How does this pnimi b'derech mamela affect? Just because you grew and you have more intellect, or suddenly the midah should get weaker?
Maybe it is b'derech hislapshus. Essentially,
No. It is b'derech hislapshus, but he said not b'derech hisaskus. It's hislapshus. But we explained earlier that it's not through like a mechanech. In other words, as I said, when you're 20 years old, even if there was no education, there's going to be a natural weaker midah intensity than a 5-year-old, without anything. Where's that coming from? That's not coming from the meichen directly. It's coming through the meichen, as he's going to explain. Acha inyan hu. Answer is the zesh meichen pelim chlishus b'midas ein zeh meichen atzma. That's the key. The fact that meichen pel, the effect that the midas get weaker, is not from the meichen on their own. It's not the intellect on its own. You have to say the intellect, in other words, has something that's not intellectual.
Could that be bichlal? Forget Ein Sof. Intellect has an oil, not necessarily Ein Sof.
Let's first read what he says.
Could that be?
Yeah, but Eir is another word for Ein Sof. I mean, what does Eir mean?
No, because I'm trying to say, even without the Ein Sof thing, just the
But
mere
you mean
fact-
Eir as an energy, or you mean
Yeah,
Eir as
yeah.
not divine? Is that what you mean?
Not necessarily divine.
Yeah, but as soon as you say it has energy, you're wondering where the energy comes from. So the energy itself is already higher. It's just semantics, really. When we say divine, let's read it for a second. In other words, you're asking whether it's not in Kedusha, can you also have this?
Exactly.
I understand. So that's a good question. We talked about it a bit. For example, it says in Maimorim that philosophers and thinkers and scientists, the more they learn, the more yesh they become. At the same time, in Torah, he says that the philosophers of old had the ability to have like a real intellectual experience. They were able to get away from their midas. So clearly, that it's an interesting question whether a person could have it outside of Kedusha. You have to say, first of all, mitzad b'chira and other things, that there's a me'ein even by Chacham, Gadol, But the fact of the matter is, look at the bottom line is, down the line, not just Aristotle. I was just reading Rousseau, one of the great philosophers. He took his 5 children and put them on the steps in the public place. Goodbye, Charlie.
And he's a big educator.
Yeah. And one after the other.
He's an authority in education.
Yeah. Voltaire, Diderot. I mean, you go down the line of all the Enlightenment, all the Chachamim, even Einstein. They all had affairs, infidelity. They were not nice to their families. They were not. Basically, the big chiddush of Avram Avinu, Lasses, Daka, and Mishpah, they didn't have. They did not build families on the yesodus of their big beliefs. But there's no families that live that way, and they have no grandchildren that talk about them in that way. I mean, that's a So you have to say at the end of the day that this worship of their mind, they're missing. It's a meichen. The Befedish did not give it over their midas. For a moment, it masqueraded as intellect. And I'm not even saying their intellect could have been brilliant and true even. But it doesn't have the bittul that Elikuz brings. Therefore, the midas remain midas, and it's impossible for them to this. Had they lived up to what they preached, then they would have been bringing Elikuz. It could be a goy too. It doesn't have to be a Jew. But that's really what you're asking. Can Meichen do it without? The answer is that's really what he's saying. A Meichen can't really do it without. He's not spelling it out like so detailed, but that's the consequence of this.
Elikuz help Aristotle?
Because you have to be a keli to Elikuz. You have to be bottle. Everyone could. Listen. The fact of the matter. I mean, we're going to read it inside, but all of us, if we don't allow the Meichen to have, Meichen is not automatically bottle to Elikuz. It has it in it. You can choose not to. You can choose to be an intellectual and not let it affect your midas. This is choice. But the Rebbe Rashab is stating the dynamics of it. There's a chemistry here. But you have to, then it always comes down to you have to do it. I mean, look at the greatest people. What means Sheikhid Ya'aver Eine Chachamim? Mamish Chachamim, Chachma. Torah calls a person Chacham, and Sheikhid Ya'aver. It means the Sheikhid of the midas, like he says in Tanya Perek Tes, like the blood of the heart rushes to the mind, the subjectivity of the emotions rush to the intellect, and they control the intellect. That's up to every human being. So, after everything is said and done, there's no automatic anything. Even after, but if you allow yourself, there's a dynamic that works. In other words, the beauty here is that usually people think of intellect as a contradiction to being a Kabbalah sale. You know, intellect is a contradiction to being a refined person. You know, you're an intellectual. That's enough. The point he's saying here is that no, Meichin, not Kabbalah sale itself. Meichin is a keli for Elokus. It's unbelievable chiddush. You know what I'm saying? Because you could say, Nasa v'nishma, you know what? I put my mind aside, I'll just do what Eibishter wants. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, Meichin, if you allow it, is itself a keli for Elokus and bittul. So let's read it. Let's read it inside.
I want to.
This is
acknowledge the sponsor of the breakfast, the Kalman Hashikeh. Have a lot of nachas.
Amen.
Should be more and more people
right.
connected to the share
And for those in virtual reality, you're going to have to do without locks this morning.
So the Nishma is actually partially connected with Elokus. The Nishma is also connected. It's partially
Absolutely. I remember a sikha from the Rebbe, Meredith sikha. It's printed in, I think it's Sefer HaSichas Memches, Pedig Beis of Pirkei Avos. So the Rebbe said then, you know, it says, the Mishnah begins, the second Pedig, Rebbe Emer, Rebbe, Stam. The Rebbe sagt, as Ezu Derech Sheyavrle Min Adam. You know, what's the path that a person should choose? So it says that the paths of Ezu Derech, what's the last second? The path of Teferes Lei, Teferes Lei Seha. You know, that's basically that. A path that's beautiful for him and beautiful for his actions, that everyone sees as beautiful. So the Rebbe, I remember, like you could see, you know, the Rebbe had those type of klotz kashas. He says, Tamol, the whole Torah talks about listening to God and to the Torah. Mitamol, a whole Mishnah begins, what's good, what's the path you should choose? Not Torah mitzvahs, not Yiddishkeit, not what the God says. What is nice for you and nice for others? I remember the Rebbe made that, you know, like klotz kasha. And the Rebbe's answer was unbelievable. You can't even imagine what would be the answer to such a thing. The Rebbe's answer is, this is Pedig Beis. Pedig Beis is relying on Pedig Aleph. Pedig Aleph says already, Mesha Kibbul Teda Misinai. So does Veismendach. So first step is Eishes Chachma Yiras Hashem, which means the first step is Kabbalah Teda, Kabbalah Misinai, like it says in Sfarim. Why is it Kibbul Misinai? He wasn't Kabbalah from the mountain. But Sinai is representative of Bittul, the lowest of all mountains. Mochach Mochal Teraya. So Moshe Kibbul, and everything is Kabbalah. Musar Yeshua this Canaan, etc. Now that you learned that you have a Nasa, that's Nasa. Then comes the second step, Nishma. Now you have to make that derech has to be beautiful. Now you have to use your seichel and you made this, and it should be beautiful. It's not just enough to do it because Eibishter wants. You have to also do it because it feels right, and it's also beautiful with das tachten, right? Internalized. Basically, makim and primi. Essentially, what he's saying here. I mean, here he's not talking Nasa v'Nishma. Here he's talking Meichel Chatchila. But the idea that the ultimate power of Chabad, Chassidus Chabad, is the ultimate contradiction. Like in a sense, the difference between Polish Chassidus or Chabad, or Muslim and Chabad and Chassidus. What do you do with the Yesh and the Midas? So generally, the most logical, intuitive approach is you just have to, Kabbalah Sel has to whip it into submission. And that's it. I mentioned a Grabe Jung and Shiflas Adam, and you have to whip it into submission. The idea that a person can remain a personality and their midas should have impact and not be ignored is and at the same time they should be bottled to the seems like a contradiction. Either you're a yesh or you're not a yesh. Kabbalah Sel seems to be the solution. Nasa, but it doesn't say only Nasa, it's Nasa v'Nishma. This is where Chassidus comes into play. Or even more important, you don't even need, if you really think about it, here he's making a case Api Kabbalah. Because if that's the case, Tikkun shouldn't have Midas. Tell you is Midas were intense. We see what kind of destruction they did. Tikkun should be only Meichen. Or only Kabbalah sale. What's the done Midas? Taka Midas B'chlishus. But the fact that the Elam HaTikkun, you're being Mesakin, as he's saying, not just that there was no Kabbalah sale, you also be Mesakin, you want the Midas to be repaired. So right here is the Yesod.
It's all about Midas.
Yeah, and this is Kabbalah 101 from all the way from Zohar. So it's basically, you could think this is a basis of Chassidus Chabad, that Elam HaTikkun has Midas is really a negation of any Shita that refuses to acknowledge Midas or wants to just break them. It's, I think, I never thought of it that way. It's a Meridikiraya. Because then the Tikkun should have been a Tikkun. And no Midas, you see, like Mabul. The people were destroyed. You destroy them. That's it, and start a new world. Now, the world has to be Mavada the Midas. It's not enough. And that's the whole thing with Meichen. That's what Meichen do. Interesting. I mean, this is just the more the more you read it, the more it's unbelievable the case he makes here.
Double conduit of Meichen.
So anyway, so let's read it. Yeah. So therefore, so it has to come from Skiasech. Okay, he goes like this. So you have to say, where am I up to? That which Meichen appeals and affects a weakening of the Midas. Remember the intensity of the Yesh of the Midas, the Hergish of that I feel this, I feel that. That comes from the Meichen. That's not from the Meichen themselves. From the energy that rests, that Sheda. And Sheda always means it's coming from outside of it. It's Ashra, like Ashra Ashchina. It's Sheda, the Meichen. And Perek Lamed Hey, Tanya, yeah, the Haggah. But you said the Meshmaitim made it, yeah. V'hainu, so here it goes. V'hainu de b'seichel yesh bo ze eir shel amayel ma seichel be'etzem. It's the next step. Seichel has in it an energy that is higher than Seichel be'etzem. Midas doesn't have that energy. Remember, Midas has it, but it's so deep, it doesn't have in any giludik way. Everything has a lakus in it. But Seichel in a giludik way, in a revealed way, has something that's higher than Seichel. Because remember, Midas also, he said, Zoh Ochid Betalia, Ba'atika Ochid Betalia, it also has a very high root. But it's like anything, you know. Yeah. Ki ha-seichel shehu keich pnimi v'hu keich ha-yesenal sheb-nefesh hadu keil le'er ha-nefesh de'er etzem ha-nefesh sheda b'teichi. Seichel, now he's explaining this. Because seichel is being a keich pnimi, meaning an internal keich. V'hu keich ha-yesenal sheb-nefesh, and is the highest and most exalted faculty in the nefesh, in the soul. Hadu keil le'er ha-nefesh. So it's a keli to the Eir HaNefesh, more in other words than all other keiches. I'll explain that in a minute. The Eir Etzem HaNefesh Eir B'teichi. I think he said it, we learned it earlier also. Pasha Begashmius, being that the Chachma is the first Gilui Pnimi outside of the Nefesh, so it's so close to the Nefesh, in other words conceptually, therefore it carries the Nefesh more than anything else does. Similar, which is why in the head, in the brain, it's not just a mind, like Rosh Hashanah that Rabbi speaks about. It's also the central nervous system. So it's not, in other words, the mind, the brain, besides being a faculty among all the faculties, besides being one of the Amach Evarim, it happens to be one that's a central Aver that controls everything. What's the reason for that? Because he's saying, because Chachma is the first Gili outside of the Nefesh. So it's like, the Nefesh, think of the Nefesh as one big amorphous, one big central energy. The first ray that comes out of it is Chachma. So Chachma carries it all. It can't get to the other levels without Chachma. So from that you see that Chachma has two things. One thing that it's an Aver, Chachma mitzad atzmei. Second, it's a Keli to something that's outside of it, which is the Nefesh. That's what he's saying. So it's a Keli. And the Ikad he adds, I was just thinking, why do you say Keich Primi? Because it's not enough to just say it's a Gili. Because Ratzon is also a Gili from the Nefesh. But Ratzon is not a Keich Primi. So Ratzon doesn't really carry it into the other Keiches. Follow that. You want it to carry it in an internalized way. In other words, to say the willpower of a person is the central nervous system, you can't say that. Because the willpower is again from outside, it just commands. Chachma is both things. it's the first, but it's also it's a keich pnimi and it's the first. So therefore, it carries in pnimius what the nefesh has b'makif or be'etzem. Did you guys follow that?
One more time, please.
Huh?
One more time, sorry.
3 more times, please.
3 more times. Okay. No. The point is like this. Let's back off for a moment. The neshama before it comes down to the body, we don't fully understand, but we know it's definitely one thing. It doesn't have a body, so it's just a neshama. We know the neshama has all the keiches hanefesh. That even in Gan Eden, the neshama has ave and yira and meichin and all that. It learns Torah. We can't really relate to it because we don't know how it works without a body, without the physical manifestation. But let's just abstract for a moment, say it's a form of energy, and on an energy level it's existing and doing all these things, right? It doesn't have all the hagbolas of the body, so it doesn't get tired, it's not hungry, and etc. It does its thing. Then the neshama comes into a body. Those keiches hanefesh, now suddenly, again, in the most mysterious way, we don't know exactly how it works, but in some way, keich hamafilases, the able to connect body and soul, and now suddenly the keich hachochme from the nefesh rests in the brain, keich hariyah in the eyes, keich hamidus in the heart, and every part of the body has become now a keli for a certain faculty, and they're like one. In the beginning of the Hemshech, he talks about barichus. They become one. You can't even differentiate between the two, right? The power of vision does not fit into the ears, and the power of hearing doesn't fit into the eyes. It's a pneumistic relationship. Yeah, I'm not getting into the understanding exactly, but that's how we know that works that way. So what's the exact process that happens once the neshama is in the guf? You have to say that there's something still in the nefesh that's not coming into each aver. It still remains, we call it etzem nefesh. Or we call it like, we call keiches ha-klulim b'nefesh. There's keiches ha-nelomim, and there's keiches ha-gluyim. There's 3 things. In other words, these keiches, there's a process. It doesn't take much time. But we know that there's the way the keich is inside the keli, in a conscious way. There's something that's concealed, and there's how it's kol in the nefesh until it's in the nefesh itself. So the question is, how does that process, how does it flow? So if you think of the nefesh in this sense like a reservoir of water, and let's think of chochmah as a faucet, okay? So you have a reservoir of water. It's like a big body of water, a pool. It's indivisible. You can't drink water from a reservoir. It's just too much. So you need to have water mains, pipes, go into your house, and then it comes to a faucet. You turn on the faucet, the water runs in a controlled way. If the faucet breaks, it'll flood. So what's happening? You're connecting now to the source, but it's coming through a very controlled flow. So that first flow, the first so-called regulator, filter, that brings from the reservoir to you and the pnimius, is the chochmah. That's the first step. So chochmah, therefore, is essentially that first step of the conduit that's then going to come into bina and das and chesed and gvura and teferes, etc., etc. So basically, what you know from this is that chochmah has 2 parts to it. One is the faculty that it is, like one of the 10 spheres, but it has something that no other sphere has. It's the first step from the source. So therefore, it has the source in it in ways that no other keich has. That's what he's basically saying. So chochmah really has these 2 sides to it, which is why wisdom, by definition, has bittul to it. That's why when we think, you can't be thinking about yourself. If you think about yourself, you can't really think about an idea. Midas is all about me. What? Midas is all about me. Me. I feel me. Meichin, by definition, by its personality, is such that it has a bittul in it, a natural bittul. Now, whether that bittul will turn into a lakus and being a refined human being, that's already going to being up to the person. But by itself, it has that element to it. Is that clear?
Yes. See, maybe want to take a break and have a session?
No.
Let's take a 5-minute break, yeah.
Yes,
Just to spread
Good.
things out. Huh?
Okay.
He's on a roll.
Good. Okay.
You guys, if you guys want
For
to.
you, no.
For me, I don't need any break.
Okay.
Water is good for me.
I need it when the dishwasher.
you don't mind.
People that were more making
Is Pashat what? What did you say?
Wow.
is more illig and the people
It's a very good question, excellent question. I'll repeat the question. The Tzedek Chassidus this actually, that a Seichel Giluyim is a stira to Elokus. It's master al Elokus. So what's the story? And you'll see from this Mashal of Baal Shem Tov, and the answer is there also. What's the meaning behind it? It goes like this. I mentioned before, Perik Aleph of Pirkei Avos starts with Nasa. You don't start with Primius. Remember, even Chochmah comes first from Keser. So the first Sfira really is Keser, not Chochmah. So there's no question that Kabbalah Seil or Nasa and Bittul is the first step. But we're talking about now in the second step. In the second step, you Befedish need it. The Baal Shem Tov was also accused the other way around. Some people accuse that. It's only for Anoshim Shutim. That was one of the big tainas from Shnagel. Even today they say, Baal Shem Tov, I heard once from one organization, not to mention names, said Baal Shem Tov saved Jews and the Gross saved Eden. I'm sorry, the Baal Shem Tov saved Jews and the Gross saved Torah. Basically saying, Baal Shem Tov was good for Anoshim Pshutim, who were like downtrodden and simple and this. So he gave them a little hope. But Torah he didn't give them. That's why the Rebbe is such a leichem on it. The Alter Rebbe is actually the biggest menaged to all Misnagdim, because if there was no Alter Rebbe who wrote a Shulchan Aruch and a Tanya and as a Gon Nifla Kul Alma, they could still tie this. Chassidus gave inspiring, but it's not the bread and butter as they like to say. It's the candies. But the fact of the matter is, the Baal Shem Tov was a Gon Adin himself, as the Rebbe points out. The fact that he touched the Noshim Pshutim was not because of Pshutim, because there's something they have that Chochmah does not have on its own. So I wanted to tell you the mashals, but what's the mashal? On mashal of the Baal Shem Tov, on the pasuk Fil Ani, right? Kiyatif. What's the lashon there? Right. So he asked, what's it Tefillah Ani? What's your Ani? It should be Tefillah Asher. Why a poor person? Why like a poor person, not like an Asher, like a wealthy? And he gives the famous mashal. It's made a mashal. You probably all heard it probably. Anyway, I'll say it b'kitzur. It's very relevant here. That there were two people invited to see a king. One-time experience. One was a Chacham Gadol, literate, educated, aristocrat, sophisticated, ala gutazach. The second was an Ani, Meducha, didn't know no Giluyim at all. Couldn't learn, didn't appreciate anything, didn't have any sophistication at all. A Pashat Mensch, peasant, a poyer, And it says the Chacham went in because he saw the palace for the first time. He was so overwhelmed by the art and by the music and by the beauty and by the pillars, the whole thing, that he got so enamored by it, he got stuck in the halls and never ended up by the Melech. He missed his appointment. Comes the second, the pauper, the Ani, he comes in, he doesn't know what all this is anyway. So he walks straight to his appointment, spends all the time with the king, asks for everything he needs, including for the blessing that Rebbe once added, that he should appreciate all this one day. So what's the vart here? That when you stand before God, L'fnei Hashem Yishpech Sichi, you have to suspend all your galuyim, because if you bring all your intelligence and all your sophisticated tools, then that's what you're going to be taking. You're going to miss the appointment. You're going to miss the etzem. Whereas if you suspend it all and just go in like a ish pasha, like a child, without all these things, you meet the king himself, you spend all the time together, and then you get everything plus the giluyim. So the point is that Chochmah on its own, if you just let it roam and just capture just with all the giluyim and intelligence, you could miss the etzem. That's why you need to have an element of bittul and kabbalah sale. But the other hand is also true. Chassidus does not demand just bittul and kabbalah sale and stop there. You have to learn Torah. You have to understand what you're learning. I remember once the Rebbe saying that Torah is aruch meretz mideh rechov miniyam. So what's the point? You have to understand. You'll never understand it anyway. It's infinite. As much as you understand, you're never getting closer. And how much you understood, Rabbi Akiva understood more than you. So what's the shanuv gitan? Your small mind is understanding a few things. So the Rebbe said two things. He said, number one, the Torah zok the medaf hashtein. So if you take such a Kabbalah sale, the Kabbalah sale demands that you have to understand. And the Rebbe said then, I remember, a few times he said this word, when you learn something to understand mitzad because Kabbalah says so, do you work harder in understanding it or less than someone who does it because they have geschmack in it? So initially you'd think a person who has geschmack is going to learn more be'iyun. So no, because when you learn mitzad geschmack, once you have your geschmack, it's over with. But Kabbalah says demands that you continue learning and understanding even when you're not in the mood. So in a sense, Kabbalah says machriach compels you to understand more than Seichel does. Verstehst? So no one should ever say that's coming just because of Geshmak. It's taka coming from because Eibusha said so. And then the Rebbe added that when you do a taka with Geshmak, the whole Kabbalah cell is different. Because then it's grounded, it's integrated, and that whole thing. I mean that's better. I'm answering your question. The Unterste Shura is that.
Yeah, you answered very well, but you see, I will sit in my Rebbe, I was going to make that's how I want to explain it.
Yeah, but then why did the Rebbe Rashab write? This is very mechandik. I mean, this you have to heart of it. This is no Kabbalah sale here. I mean,
asking you, how is it that?
Because Mechan has its. Remember, let's just not forget something. It's one big puzzle. Whole Seder Shtalshus is one big. When I say puzzle, I mean it's a mosaic. It's pieces. When you speak about the Maila of Mechan, as you're speaking here, it has its role. This does not negate the role that you have to have an element that is beyond you all the time. As a matter of fact, the whole Inyan started. Remember, Eir Makif? What's the Maila of Eir Makif? To put a bittul on the person because it's not Bepnimius. So I think you have to succeed as pieces. The fact that Bepel Mamish, most people who are Mechan are less Kabbalah Selniks, because the nature of Mechan is it starts getting to you because the Giluyim are powerful and it's harder to have pure plain Kabbalah Sel. That's the nature of it. But the truth is, Chassidus Chiddush is that Mechan Be'etzim really have bittul even more than Midas do. The difference is really comes down to a person who has only Kabbalah Sel, it's more or less like Bal Korchach. You basically say Chava Mida, Taiva, Skafi. Mechan is not like that. Mechan is Bislapshus more. It trains a person. So in a way, but Mechan has its other trap. Because it's Mechan and Pnimius, it's by nature not a Kabbalah Selnik. You know? So that's the work. The Peil Mamish is what you're saying is that we don't have a perfect world. It's true. The Mittler Rebbe said to the Chassid, the Mittler Rebbe had a Tanai. If you came to see him for Yom Tevim or Shabbos, when you went back, you had to Chazer Mamorim in the cities. So one Chassid came and said, he's getting to his head. That's when the Mittler Rebbe said, that Sibyl is all from the Vern, but Chassid is also Chazer. The Rebbe always brings it. I mean, I feel if you were at Sibyl, the stinks were at Sibyl with Yeshes. The Mittler Rebbe could have said easily, no, Arbet av zich, then you start chazening. It's nicht azeh. In other words, Chassidus said, Enochanami, if it's mechin, so say mechin, and slowly you'll work on yourself. But it's true, a person who's a Baal mechin, there's no question, it's harder. A person who doesn't have mechin, it's easier for them to just listen. That's how it is, because a Baal mechin wants to understand. But the Chiddush of Chassidus is faked that even Mechin really is a Keli for Elokus. That's the beauty of it. So, ultimately it works on all levels. In other words, you don't need Kabbalah Seil alone to become a Keli Elokus. Mechin could be a Keli, but it's going to take a lot more work. It's easier. The Derech Tzarav Arucha is for sure folk, and that's it, Nasa. And don't think for yourself. I talk to some of my friends I have, smart guys. I said, you guys, they said, by us, Mechin is what you call Nefesh Abamis. To think is klipa. We're trained not to think. They say that's the shita. Because thinking gets you into trouble. We don't think that. That's not Chabad. We're not afraid of questions. We're not afraid of thinking about something. Because number one is, to basically tell somebody, blindfold yourself and don't think, and that's the way you'll be a Frum Eid. That's obviously not the way. But more importantly, think. Enochanam Machshav Mechin has its klippas, but at the end of the day, Mechin is a Keli of Elikus. That's the bottom line. In Tanya, Perek Lamed Hey says in Haggash, Shemaiti Memeri, that Chochmah is a Sheira Ein Sof Baruch Hu, which is the real place. In other words, in the context of the interface, not Kabbalah Seil, not Keser, but Chochmah is the mamutza between Elikus and Welt. It's a big difference. You could say the other shittas, not Chabad, would say that Keser is the mamutza, and Chabad says Chochmah is the mamutza. Chochmah is Tema, but Chochmah. It has to have, or else it's not integrated in this world. The consequences of the other way around is basically that you cannot have Elokus in the Welt von Seichel, and you have to destroy all Seichel or eliminate it for Elokus to be here. That's the consequence of it.
Meichen people, you said that Meichen is more like market, right? But if their market goes into them, it should change them, although they're Meichen people, no?
So because someone came to the Friedrich Rebbe and said that Shmuel Witten is a bissl a hard guy, is a midis cautious a bissl.
Yeah.
Someone said to the Friedrich Rebbe, and I can't chassidus. He knew a lot of chassidus, and everyone admitted that. So the Friedrich Rebbe, of course, said, "We wissen wir wohl given on chassidus." We don't know how we would be without chassidus. In other words, look, you're asking a good question. It's like anything. Torah says that when you learn Torah, L'Shma, or whatever, it's Sam Movis. You learn properly Sam Chayim. Now, chassidus is meant to solve that problem because nigla, like it says in Kuntres Eitz Chayim, nigla because you're Esik and Isra Beheter and all the Taina Shel Sheker. But the fact is, you can learn chassidus and also be a Rabbi Jung. I mean, the Rabbeim themselves talk about maskilim and haskalah without aveda, etc., where it could lead. At the end of the day, b'chira, everybody has will, free will. There's no such thing as an automatic path. Just because you're going to learn chassidus, automatically things will happen. No. But we could say that when you stand by Fabrengen, or you learn chassidus, it picks you up at least for that moment, and hopefully there'll be a pulnim shachas. But it's always aveda. There's no such thing as without work. Nothing happens without aveda. There's Meisha back to Tilim. It's always a combination of the two, and
what you explain, not the difference in the shit is how is the you convince the other one intellectually, you convince the Nefesh Lakis convinces the Nefesh Bahamas intellectually that this is the right, not whipping him into submission.
No, you're saying, how do they explain that? Well,
they explain that it's Api Nigla even.
No. First of all, we have plenty of rayas Api Nigla the Chabad, but I'll tell you how they explain it. I've read, see, by them, and again, I don't want to mention names, but there are organizations that work in Kiruv, okay? And I've studied their methods. And their method of explaining the Nefesh Habamis is like, let's call it like these proofs, the Torah, the codes in the Torah. Or that Chassidus doesn't take that approach. Tell me why. The Torah is Torah Semes. There's hints for everything. You never saw that the Rebbe was the Rebbe's derech to prove that the Holocaust happened and everything in history happened. Occupy Wall Street is hinted to, and 3 psukim, etc., etc. Even if it's true, why the Rebbe not derech? Because that's not hasbara to Nefesh Habamis. That's like, it's still b'derech kfiyah. I'm going to overwhelm you with a proof, and the best that I is what happens afterwards. Even if someone, I know people who became frum from some of these seminars, and almost none of them stayed. Because it's not b'pnimis. It's like they couldn't deny the truth of it. Like, when you saw someone overwhelmingly shows you 55 or 100 proofs that the Torah is emes through codes, you may overwhelm them intellectually, but you didn't get their midas. And when they start living a Jewish life, remember, not every day they're going to have this intellectual inspirations. They're not b'pnimis. That's the whole Tanya. Derech Arucha Ktsara. Derech Ktsara Arucha, there's a lot of ways. You can bring someone into Fabrengen, you do this. We have also ways that we do it. But we never, the problem is if you only rely on Makif, it never works. You're not giving people tools. I see this even, I even see it even in people who become frum. Whatever reason they became frum. I know people who come speak to me. Their children and so on. It's not so simple because they had an inspiration. It wasn't necessarily fully integrated and so on. And even people who were born into it. If it's not integrated, there's somewhere it's going to give. It's not that pashut. You cannot blow people away. So I think b'shnei tzerecha gufa you could explain it to. One is that you're explaining it, but it's like in a...
For me, it's the emotions, then it has a lasting effect.
Yeah. There's the Rebbe, it's a big yisod in the Rebbe when he told Baranovim to establish the Torah science. So he said there's already scientists, the Orthodox Union, there's a union of Orthodox scientists. So the Rebbe said 2 things. First of all, they're apologetic. And second of all, they are they change whatever the science says. They're going to fit the Torah to that. And then I remember some sikhs where the Rebbe spoke about it. The interesting thing is because Chassidus considers Eined Mulvade that nothing is Tefes Mokim, that's where you could absolutely integrate it with science, but not on science terms, on Torah terms. The problem is if Welt is Tefes Mokim and science is Tefes Mokim, so even if you're a Torah Id, You're fitting it to the science. You're not coming from a place, Altus bottle Mitzias, and then let's fit science and Teda. You understand what I'm trying to say? That's what's missing by them. By them, they take it, it's Mamal Kalam. They rechen sich with the Welt. And then they find a way to speak to the Welt. That's not B'shnei Tzerecha in real Hisapcha. When you come from a place where the ganze Welt you haven't bod, and it's nicht tefus mokim, and then you come back to the Welt, like that. That's the Rebbe has some very fundamental sikhs about this. It's a major, major difference. So I think Shnei Tzerecha could be one is the rechen sich mit the Yetzirah, and basically you find ways to convince it. Another way is the Yetzirah is not tefus mokim, but the Eibishter wants you to deal with it, so you find ways to explain it. But then you're doing it on your terms. You're not tailoring it. It's ultimately what the Rebbe says, the famous Sikha, the Rambam, Lamed Hey. So I want to add that in here, because it's all really relevant. Talk about these two shittas. I always had this theory. I can't tell you that's for sure right, because the Rebbe didn't say it befedish, but the Rebbe's first Rambam, Siyum, was Tosh Lamed Hey. I remember it live. It was unbelievable. It was like a 2.5 hour Sikha. Very rare, such a long Sikha. And when the Rebbe began, it was a Siyum HaMesechta Tamid, then a Siyum HaMesechta Shas, and Mitamol, it started as again. It was one of these overwhelming. If you ever want to hear the Rebbe in V'chol HaGlory, listen to Yutas Kisel Lamed Hey. So it was this, and then suddenly the Siyum and the Rambam. It was the first time the Rebbe making a Siyum and the Rambam. It would take years till the Rebbe actually. But a very interesting thing. The key chidushim in the Siyum is his main question the Rebbe asks is the Rambam. The beginning says. The first says, you say this, Vamuda Chachmas Leidish Yeshamot Tzedish. And he said, V'im Yal Ala Das. Shehu Ein Motzei, if it should arise in Das, that he doesn't exist, God, is Ein Davracha Yochel Motzes. No other thing could exist. So the Rebbe asked two key, there's a lot there, but I'll just chazar one thing that's very relevant. The Rebbe asked, first of all, it's a Sefer Halacha. In Halacha, you're considering that someone's going to consider that God doesn't exist? What's he bringing such a question here? There's halachas here. This belongs in Meir Nevuchim, a book on philosophy. In halacha, there's no such consideration. And what's the expression? Im yala al das. Yala al das means it's an aliyah in das. So it's true. You could say it's just a cliche, but it's halacha. Every word is precise. It means like an aliyah. Should you have an aliyah in das that he's not existing? And the Rebbe's main chiddush was, which is like unbelievable chiddush. And he insisted, the Rebbe, when they was Magiyah this Sikha, and he was Magiyah many, many times. I think 5-6 times. Everything was usually twice. So listen to this. The Rebbe, when he was Magiyah, he insisted that no chsidus should be in the Pnim. There's no chsidus inside the Sikha itself. Everything is Lashon of Rambam. Motzei, Ein Motzei. But in the footnotes, you see Motzei is Mamal Kalam, and Ein Motzei is Sevu Kalam, and you say this is Atzmos. But here's what the Rebbe's chiddush was. The Rebbe's chiddush, and you'll see why I'm saying it in a moment. The Rebbe's chiddush was, it is Yal Al Das. Because is God bound by creation? In other words, can you define the Eibishter as being a Motzei? That has Metzias, he's a creator? No. The Eibishter is beyond that. So the Yal Al Das is that who ain't a Motzei, that the Eibishter didn't even let himself down to a level to create. He's beyond creation. If he's beyond creation, so nothing can exist. Because there's no Mamal Kalam in Lashon Chassidus. So, but then the Rebbe's main chiddush was this. But why is that negayin halacha? Why is that negayin sefer halachas? Again, that's a philosophical Chassidish idea. And the Rebbe's answer is like this, because halacha comes to change the world. And to change the world, you can't change the world unless you go to the level of Ein Motzei. Because since God created, let's say, a table, a wood, that's Rishus, how could you make from a chefz of Rishus a chefz of Gedusha? You're not God. The thing God created as Rishus. It even says in Maimor Chazal that Rishus comes in tainas. How could you take me out of Rishus? God created me like that. How could you turn me into Kodesh? The answer is because you go back, so to speak, to the wiring room, to the engineering room, to the Ein Motzei. So the Ein Motzei gives you the power to rewire existence. So halacha requires Ein Motzei. That was a big part of the Sikha. But listen to this. A year earlier, and again, this is a hergish. Yeah, type of that. Yeah. Right. Okay. So basically, you need two things for halacha. You need motzei because you need star Welt. You can't say stuck in Welt. But you need to change the world, so you need the Eine motzei to give you that power. Just a year before, they printed, I think the first time maybe in English, Soloveitchik's Lonely Man of Faith. No, I'm sorry. No. The Halachic Man. No, different book. The Halachic Man. And I read it years later. And my hergish is that the Sikha, this part, is answering his premise. What does he say? He asks a question there. Medidika question he asks. He says, he comes from the family of Brisk, Soloveitchik, that goes from back to the Volozhiner, back to the Gra. So he asks why the Volozhiner and Brisk school of thought rejected the Alter Rebbe's approach. He says, we know that Chaim Volozhiner changed some things from the Gra. The Alter Rebbe was Megala, that you could have Isha Nigla and Isha Nister, Shulchan Aruch and Tanya, and how they both fuse. Yeah. So he said, why did they reject that approach? So he says, I'm here to be Mekachayim Divrei Rabbi say. He's here to, and the book comes to explain why, that's why it's called Ish Halacha. And he answers like this. Basically, his Nekuda is, Ish Halacha, that they believe that the Shitta for mainstream Jews is you have to take your Welt and turn it into Halacha Dike Chayfetz. In other words, a Yad, you have a hand, turn it into a hand that gives Dake. A cloth, film. A table, a shulchan for Shabbos, for Yontif, for Lednin. What goes on in the studies? Ein lana esik ben the studies. The few Yechidas Gula in every generation are Mukubalim. They know what's going on, so-called, in the engineering room, in the cosmos. But Reva Nashim, it's Allah. The Rebbe comes and says, no, even according to you, and that's halacha. Without Ein Lemotzi, halacha can't be. That's yeah, and that's why I use Rambam, because Rambam Brisk is Rambam. That's my.
That's why they forbid the Rambam most of the yeshivas just to learn Rambam.
It's Leitzach. I think it's if that's a made a dictate. Because what's mitamol the Rambam Lamed Hey? Because everyone wanted to go in halacha and show that it's talking about Al Pi Nigla. Yeah. So it's you can't. Anyway, so basically Chochmah itself, therefore, okay, here's what Lashon. In Motzei Gufa, there's Ein Motzei, basically. Yeah. Okay, say what?
Yale has a bunch of things about this.
This Rambam.
This Adranim.
I remember the Fabrengen. Everybody it was mind blowing. First of all, it was impossible to follow. The Rebbe was in such a role. The Rebbe was azay gekocht in the Ein Motzei. It says, the Nicht. Wie kann man machen? He says, Halacha darf sein zwei Sachen. Darf übermachen die Sache, aber man darf es früher machen nicht. Der soll übermachen. He says, darf nicht der Tefes Mokim sein. The Teskissel Lamed Hey.
Hey, those are the chalishus before the... First you need the chalishus and then you could be, you know...
Yeah. In a way, yeah. That's right. That's right. It's made it because it's so fundamental. It's also very scientific. You can't change the property of something unless you go to its roots, because else you haven't changed it. That's the whole chiddush of chassidus, the transformation. It's not enough just forcing things, submission. It's not enough.
Before you said that the Mutza B'dafke is Chachma, or Nish, the Mutza B'dafke Chachma, Nish Kesser. Why? Because Chachma, we have some...
Kesser is Kabbalah Shel, Kesser is Rotzen. Kesser is higher than Pnimis. That's why he keeps saying it's Pnimi.
Higher than Pnimis, and Pnimis is higher.
Okay, so let's continue. Kesechel Shu Er Pnimi is all pshat in one line here. That's how you should learn it. Because it's on one line the rest of our lives. Kesechel Shu Keich Pnimi v'hu Keich HaYesen Al Shem Nefesh Hariyu Keli Le'er HaNefesh De'er Etzem HaNefesh Shere B'Seichel. So back to that. Chochmah being the first Keli, first Er Pnimi coming out of the Nefesh is a Keli to the whole Nefesh. And it will draw... Va'er hazeh sheyesh b'seichel shula ma'ila min ha'seichel zehu shapel chlishas ba'midas. Understand? Meichen itself, it is not the motzei. Meichen itself is motzei as every midas is motzei. So how could it? They're both in the same dimension. To change midas, you need it from outside. But if it's outside, it's going to be forcing it. So you need meichen because you don't want it to be forced. So you have both things here. So the chalishus of the midas is coming from a force outside of meichen that's beyond the system, so to speak. So it can change the system. That's the answer. Before we didn't know this. Before he was speaking Meichen on its own. Where does the Chlishas come from? That's why it's so relevant. The Chlishas is not coming from
Where does
Meichen.
it fit into to beat the fair?
The thing that the Tulashen is there is to beat the Fed, should know it's Fed, and beat the Fed till they become Ace Fed. And actually they don't, there's different, sometimes which one is higher? To know they're Fed seems lower initially than their Ace Fed. But on the other hand, knowing they're Fed and is also
Transformation.
but then Ace Fed. I recall, I think Ace Fed is higher, of course, because you actually transform them. You don't just.
But first you have to know he's a Fed.
Yeah. No, Shemitah, because Ferd are Midas, basically. The Ferd are the Midas.
That's what I could ever learn.
Yeah. So the
The
Ferd are the Midas. 1 second. The Ferd are the Midas. On their own, they're wild.
Right.
So you have to train them.
It says to use a very harsh word. It says beat the fair. Doesn't say it.
No, because there's also in Tanya Bitush, Levatish and Yell. This does not negate that in some stage, but the end stage cannot be just yelling. That's what I'm saying. Beating. The first, there is an element of forcing the submission when it's necessary.
Yaakov Kol Yisrael.
What's the Lashon in Tanya? It says quite clearly, the Batish. Yeah. So I think that probably the midas begin as Ferd. First you tell them that they are Ferd, okay, so they know, that's Klishus, Amidis. And probably the next arg is when they become more eskalus, like the Kalim is more when they become Eisferd, and they actually work with each other. First thing is be safe with each other. Just tolerate. Don't be so loud. Then the next thing is cooperation. I think that's the way I would understand. If Fed Amidis, if the Fed is the pure Nefesh Abamis, I don't know, Nefesh Abamis is Midis also. Depends. There's different ways, depends how you tell it. But if, let's say Fed is Midis of Nefesh Alakiz, that's for sure the way to understand it. Midis Nefesh Abamis also. There's other expressions for it. There's the famous story of the Bedicheva by the Chasana. The Bedicheva, they both, who should go into the door? So they both didn't want to go up to Rebbe and Bedicheva Mechutanim. So they both were waiting by the door. So the Bedicheva said, let's make a hole in the wall. Right? So we both can go in. And the Alter Rebbe said, no, let's widen the door. Which is the same approach. Widen the door is always more bislapshas, the pnimis. Breaking the wall is like a shvira. It's constantly. All the sikhs, the sikh what the Rebbe says about, we spoke last week, the shmek tabak, that the Alter Rebbe was not shaykh to shvira. That expression. When they gave him the tobacco box. So he said, you want to also corrupt my smell? So but he didn't throw it out. He took out the hinge and made it into a mirror for tefillin. And there's a Friedrich Rebbe, and the story goes, the Tzemach Tzedek said, the Zayden is going shaykh to shvira. The Alter Rebbe is not shaykh to shvira, to breaking. Everything had to be a tikkun. Right. And used it for something else. Everything, even the Nachash, will Osad Lavi become a Shamish Gadol. Everything is transformation at the end of the day. Okay, so this Shari B'mech. That's what gives the Keich. L'chein ikar bit l'hamidis, l'chein ikar bit l'hamidis, u'm'keich ha'chochme davke. And that's why the ikar bitl of midis is from the keich ha'chochme. Not because of chochme mitzad chochme, but mitzad the air that's shaded in the chochme that's higher than chochme. This is mamish the crux. Very revolutionary. Because it's also revolutionary how to see intellect. It's revolutionary how to connect to the divine. It's from Allah Zaytin. But this is the crux. If we remember Meiches Tamah, this is all the same. It's the same Nekuda. This is over 100 pages that he's building to this. It's unbelievable. That means all this was in the Rebbe Rashab's mind as he built to it. Unbelievable. It's a halt mazah. Talk about Meichen.
It's the criminal.
There.
Do.
Okay, fine.
Nobody knows this.
Ich bin criminal. It took 65 years the Rebbe to publish this. It's nog een 35 jaar. Yeah. Yeah, it could make you cry. Okay. Die Hinikeach habine.
Why would he?
But why isn't it?
Anyway, not
Because Shmach like him. Why would Shemayim?
It doesn't pick up. I got the mic. I've got the floor. We made it in a way. It silences out everything.
Why would he said in 65 years he waited to publish it? This to that. But what in Shemayim? Why would they want us to know this? This is the whole basic. intellectual.
No, the bigger question is why they didn't want us to know earlier.
Okay, even then though.
If we'll never understand it anyway, so they could have been Megalit right away. If I stay 35 years ago, it's 35 years now. Something happened in the world. Yeah, but that's speculation. I don't want to, fine. No, I'm saying to you like this. Based on the Rebbe Sicha Yutas Kislev Lamed Zayin, talk about Yutas Kislev, it's coming up. It seems that till that point, the way we understand all these things, it was like Yutas Kislev, the first one. Till that point, there was a resistance. The question is two things. As I said, if we're not shaykh, we weren't shaykh, it could have been Megalit earlier. No one. Now that we are, it means that we are, and it means obviously if we reveal this stuff, it can change the world. Simple as that. There's no other way to explain it. What else? What else did Rebbe mean? Why was he resistant? Why? Because there was no money. He didn't say that. He said he doesn't want to take a chrayis. It's equivalent of Yutas Kislev. Even more than Yutas Kislev, the Alter Rebbe did take a chrayis. The Rebbe doesn't have his name in here even. There's no names in this, and so you have to say that we didn't do our job. 35 years already passed. But what's the thing? Like someone said to me, so what's the rush? It's only 20 years from Gimel Tammuz. Look, there's no question. But the only difference I disagree with Yossi is that we're all in the same boat, my friend.
100%.
Who's driving that boat?
But absolutely, you have to look at yourself. There's no question we have an achrayis, because who else is going to bring this? That's why I told you the first time I came here, even I said, we'll make a website and we'll crack. It's at least ishtadlus. You do what you got to do. You never know what it's going to do. Look, I know there are people in the world that hear this in the right language, it'll blow their minds away. They're, I'm not talking about even from people. This is mind-blowing stuff, it is. The key is to find the real, the Kiddush is also the whole development, the whole, to study this. Like the real question is now, these 100 pages were not wasted pages, they're built to this. It's all part of a picture here. It's tremendous. And all this he had in mind. There's no question, this didn't just pop up. Can you imagine 100 pages earlier, he's preparing the ground. All this is written. That's quite something. No way that when the Rebbe Rashab said this Maimon, they understood what he's talking about. They understood what he said, but the whole Hemshech had to be, and no one had it. They didn't have it b'ksav, so maybe there were a few. We were never in Makam. I asked Rabbi, I said, anyone that heard the Hemshech, gave anything over? They said, no, they heard my modern, they hit my modern. Like Samach Vov. No one knew it. You can't really, until you have it like this. It would have been good if we got Shach to attack Ayin Beis. The Rebbe Voldam would get at Ali Kedushim. That would have been good. Unweitzen, Samach Vov and Ayin Beis. That's the only way. Too late for that. Okay. This?
No, it means in our yeshivas.
It's not part of the curriculum.
First of all, you get in yeshiva, it's not even shaykh. Because it's a big flaw. You can learn a section. It's so hard to learn it all. There's no way you can cover it in a year. You can cover a few mamorim. Yeah. Okay. Well, the chain it could be limited. The nekeach habina hu shemaniges amidus. Keich habina is maniges amidus. That, like manig means what? How do you translate manig? Rules? Not manig. Guides. But it's more than guides. Conducts. Manig. Remember, this is the second half, the kelim. So bina, not chokhmah, is manigas amidus. That means they should have a scholus, but that's not the chlishus of midas. That's already that they should cooperate. Scholus midas al pi hatam v'asechel. Avol bittul hamidas shezo achlishus shelahem hu mekeich hachokhmah dafka. So bina, when you elaborate on a concept and you embellish on it and complex, it's bisachvus. Expand on it. There, the Havana Vasaga trains the midas to work with each other. But we're talking about how do you get them receptive? You know that story with the donkey that the guy sold it for a donkey. He said this donkey can carry any weight, and it listens no matter how akshonis a donkey is. This donkey listens to its master. Okay, a guy buys it for 1,000 ruble. He brings the donkey, packs up the things, and starts commanding it to move. It won't move. Whatever he says, so this goes back to the previous owner. He says, "You fooled me." He said that it listens to its master. I showed him I'm the master, and he won't listen. He says, No. The first thing you have to do is take a big 2x4 and slap it in the tuchus of the donkey. And then the donkey will listen. He said, that's not the, you say that it listens. He says, no, the smacking is only to get its attention. Once you get its attention, it listens. You know? So there's two things in Midas. You have to get their attention. That they need some bittul for that, the bittul chlishis. Once you get their attention, Bina comes in and starts training them. So someone has to bring them into the classroom first. Because Midas on their own are wild. Why should they listen b'chla? I know, he's gonna buy a 2x4, huh? Now, the Rebbe gesagt, Cheshvan about it's the masmid. You know what he said? You know? I verbringen once. Friedrich Rebbe verbringen Shabbos. And he asked Cheshvan, who is each? So he says, Nadav. So Friedrich Rebbe, made that he should call him. He went to call him. He says, he's in the palace. Who knows the middle Yichudi Allah, Yichudi Tata. And the Rebbe ruft. Nothing. Goes back. And another 10 minutes passed, and Friedrich Rebbe again says, who is each? So he goes again. The Rebbe ruft. He comes back, and the Friedrich Rebbe knew. He says, each darf me schmeißen. Friedrich Rebbe says, yeah, enoch enami, aber es ist nicht wer. He said, Isha, you have to basically slap him. He means, figuratively. So the Friedrich Rebbe said, yeah, true, but there's no one to do it. So, it's a bavarnish. I remember I verbringen once, it was a Shchedish Oder Tovshin Mem, right after Shnas HaShleishin. But the Rebbe's big Giluyim, whenever big dates were never on the date itself, was usually a small verbringen afterwards, just for the record. So the Rebbe said in the middle of verbringen, very interesting, he said that, what did he say? He mentioned that some people are sleeping by the verbringen, I think. So he said in the times of Reb Marash, there was a Gabbai, I think he mentioned his name, Reb David or something, that when the Reb Marash would say a Maimer, he would lock the doors, and then he'd go over to everybody with smelling salts to wake him up. Huh? Okay, yeah, Shamaritza. Like a strong tobacco. And he'd wake them up, they couldn't, and the doors were locked, so they couldn't run away, so they had to stay. So the Rebbe said, Hein kemnish vashpan de tirin. Today we can't lock the doors because people are going to break the doors down. And also, we don't have a person to go around to everybody, so everybody should use their own tobacco to v'chaleinu v'vek. Everyone should wake themselves up. I remember that. Yeah. The Rebbe told Zamgar, I read in his book there, he says that the Rebbe told him, bei Verbringen schlafen amiut mit vermachte Augen und Reiv mit offenen Augen. That's? He said, schlaft mit offenen.
He was always,
oh yeah,
he was listening.
And he would pinch in this.
You got a shafer.
Yeah. You ever see, he would do like this, he'd wake himself up. But the cloud, it's interesting, the video, maybe they only choose those videos, but there's the guys behind under the videos, they more or less, they keep awake through hours, and they're older people.
Yeah,
They didn't even know, yeah. Well, Mendel Futterfass had a solution for that.
No, but officially the Shvil was for that.
Yeah.
Where sharks sat there like a soldier the whole time.
Yeah. Aber bitte.
I'm not sure if it's the same thing. Let's talk about that. The Malama would hang the kanchik. So he's a Malama, good Malama was not going to hang. If the guy got Malama like Colin Kerr, he would have to use it. But there's some, even though in that second difference, the Rebbe used to say, er nimmt the kanchik und schmeißt ihn über in v'chulu. That's it.
Oksakei Chabine is manig, the midas. Once you get them listening, אבל ביטל המידס שזהו החלישה שלהם הוא כיח החוכמה דווקא, כמו שכוסף במקום אחר. והיינו לפי שהחוכמה הוא בחינס עין וביטל. And now he's explaining why. So he said, there's a lot of, these few lines have a lot in them. So he said that Chachma is the first, that the bittul does not come from Chachma, it comes from something beyond Chachma, but it comes through Chachma because Chachma is the first Kayach Primi that comes out of the Nefesh. Now he's going to say that Chachma is bittul. Why? Because Chachma is Bechines Ayin and bittul. Because if Chachma is not Ayin and bittul, it wouldn't be a Keli to this thing higher than Chachma. Bina, for example, doesn't have Kesed in it, doesn't have the Eir Sheder because it doesn't have bittul like that. The Al-Shem Zeh Nikra B'Shem Chachma. And on this reason, on this name, it's called the name Chachma. Koyach Ma. Chachma is Koyach Ma. Or Kumash Kosov, like it says in the Pasuk. Chachma Ma'ayin Timotza. Chachma, the word literally means Chachma, from where does it come? But you could translate Ma'ayin, it comes from Timotza, it comes from Ayin. Chachma Atzme B'chinas Ayin. Chachma alone is from the level of Ayin, Ma. Va'bitl Chachma B'chinas Bitl Atzmi. Now he's explaining what kind of bitl is this Chachma. The bitl of Chachma is Bitl Atzmi. In other words, it's a fundamental bitl. It's not a Chisenis Dika bitl. It's part of the Mohus and the Etzem of the personality of Chachma. Ukumei b'Moshe d'ksiv bei v'nochnu ma. Kayach ma. Machnu ma. B'chinas bitl b'etzem. Like the level of Moshe that says v'nochnu ma. So this type says ma is ma, what? Bitl be'etzem. So it's kayach ma, it's a kayach of ma, kayach of bitl. Valkein ha-chochma pe'ol ha-bitl b'chol dover. And since chochma carries his bitl. In other words, in addition to the fact that there's the Ein Sof, the energy that's shade in chochma, that's higher from chochma, the way Chachma does that because Chachma is bittul, so the Chachma bittul carries over into everything that it touches. Chachma pel bittul chadav. Chachma affects bittul in everything. V'omnom gam zeh ma sheyesh b'chachma b'chinas habittul zeh mipnei sheb'chachma meir b'chinas ayin amitish b'chinas atzma seir ein sof. So he's adding now. Chachma has bittul is not from itself. Omnom gam zeh, that Chachma, even this. Also, this that Chachma has bittul is not because Chachma in it is meir radiates the ayin amiti. So Chachma is ayin, but in it radiates a higher ayin, the emes ayin, the ultimate ayin that's atzmus ein sof. So now he's finally introducing atzmus ein sof. He didn't introduce it yet. Till now he's just
Ayin completely different ways. First he's using ayin as bittul, and then he's using ayin as what goes into the bittul.
correct, but remember.
Just the opposite.
Well, not mamish because remember
It's
because
like saying ayin the ayin.
no. Chachma is a level of ayin compared to the levels below it. Basically, so it's both elements to it. Yeah, I think he's going to explain this, I believe. But now he's introducing atzma sein and stuff. So just the gradation of the steps. Number one is that he explained that Chachma, that the Chachma has within it something that's beyond Chachma. That's what poils the bittul and the midas. Chachma is the first Eir Pnimi that comes, so it has etzem nefesh in it. Bina is manig the midas, but Chachma poils the bittul. Because Chachma is ayin, kayach ma, nachnu ma, and as a result, this itself is because it is. It's because it is is because it is meir the ayin amiti atzmasen. Kiyadu the Ein Sof sharei b'chachma dafke, as it's known that Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, the sheda rests dafke in chachma. K'mash kosa beitz chaim the Ein Sof meir b'chachma b'kiruv mokim. Like it says in Eitz Chaim that Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, radiates in chachma b'kiruv mokim, in a close way. They're very close. Valkein ha-chachma hi b'chinas bittul b'chinas ma, and that's the reason that chachma is bittul b'chinas ma, k'moi ma pishpashto b'chinas bittul mitzias. Right, ma pishpashto ma. What's the second one? Right, ma pishpashto ma mitzasa. What is he adding Mapish Pashta here? Why not before? So it's interesting. First he started that because Chachma is bittul, that's why it's a keli. Now he's saying that gufa that is bittul is because it's a keli. It's because the ayin amiti rests in it. Which one is it? I guess both. No, it's omnam gamzeh. So the bottom line, it goes the other way around. It starts from the top. Because it's kid of mokim. Because it's coming right out of the etzim. It's close to the etzim, shade Ein Sof, that's why it's bottle. And because it's bottle, it could be a keli to Ein Sof. It goes both ways. It looks like.
Basically, well, when Chachma is shade and the MS, that's when you.
Because if it didn't have bittul, it wouldn't be a keli. If it didn't, yeah.
You could basically, because the iron is shining basically in Chachma, and you really understand. So when you really understand Chachma, that's when you can be shade of bittul, and that's when Ein Sof can be shade on it, right?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah, both directions. I'm just trying to see here. 1 second. Okay, it's how about Talia? It goes hand in hand. The personality of Chochmah is such, of Bittul, because in it is Ein Sof, and therefore Chochmah itself is a Bittul dik entity. Koyach Ma. Wow. Okay, so. Ach dafke Chochmah keli lashros hashchina, lashros Ein Sof, lefi shachochmah eino b'chinas hasoga adayin. Now he's explaining. So why is Chochmah? It's not that Chochmah somebody has bittul out of nowhere. Chochmah is because Ein Sof is Sheda and Chochmah. But why Chochmah? Why is it not Sheda and Bina? What does Chochmah have in it that Bina doesn't have or other levels doesn't have? So the answer is because it's not Hasoga yet. Chochmah did not yet begin to understand. It's just the beginnings of Mechin. Yeah.
He's not into grasping.
Exactly. It's not yet Hasoga, it's not yet grasping it really. That's what's missing by these Chachomim that we spoke about.
They have Bina.
Bina they have, yeah. And that's
but the minute that you're grasping it,
remember, Bina, as we said, Bina
Bina
doesn't have the power to be Machlush the Midas. Only Chachmah does. Yeah, that's what it comes down to weaken the Midas.
Yeah.
To tame the Midas. That's very good. Okay.
3 articles.
It's 1 through. Shazel Gamkin.
Doesn't Chachma do it through Bina? I mean, they don't do it.
Yeah, once it's Chachma, it starts doing. That's what he's probably going to explain. But and Shazel Gamkin in Habitl Dari Kol Hasoga Hu Yesh. That's a cloud that you can underline. Kol Hasoga Hu Yesh. So this is also the union of Bitl that is not Hasoga yet, because every Hasoga is Yesh. If Chachma is Hasoga, then it's a Yesh, not an Ayin. Every Hasoga, which means every grasping, every understanding is Yesh. That's the reason. The Yesh from Hasoga. The Chsidim was from der Hert. As a nicht ich, nor Hert dem Rebens, and they understood it. The Chudus von Chochmah. Va'chochmah she'ein Hasoga ze b'chinas bittul. Chochmah that's not Hasoga. That's not Verstand. Hasoga is Verstand. Understanding is b'chinas bittul. וכמושנו הסבר ליל פרק מ"ם בייז, גם השכלי דחוכמה, זה בחינת הנוחה שכלס. הנוחה אין הסוגה. גם השכלי דחוכמה, even the seichel of chokma is not hasoga. It's hanocha sichlis. It's leitzich. It's a sense. It's like an instinct. That's how it's like almost an intuition, but a seichel. I would say hanocha sichlis. Zeh leitzich. That's how, like when you say someone says that's how I get it. That's not emotionally. But Seichel says that's how I.
Intuition.
Yeah, intellectual intuition type of thing. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
The in hanocha ain't hasoga, and hanocha is not hasoga. Hasoga is understanding. Here's an example. Hasoga you can explain to someone else. Hanocha you can't explain. You could just say that's how I get it. That's how I got it that way.
Since Shanachas, I can't explain it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's not hergish.
It's almost like Riyah. It says Riyah. You say, yeah, I'm finished.
Ubefrat beginnes Hariyah de Chachma. Ubefrat, but here it's clear that Hanoche and Riyah are not the same thing. Befrat.
Riyah is Nachman.
Yeah, Befrat, especially Riyah de Chachma, when Chachma, like you see it like in front of your eyes. See even more than Hanoche. Al ken HaChachma keli la'ashros eidin se baruchu, and that's my Chachma. Because it's not Hasaga, it's a keli, a container for Ashros eidin se baruchu. Because it's empty. You know, a keli that's full, nothing can go in. Chachma is empty of itself. So therefore, it could be a Hashra of Erein Sof.
100% sure it was right. He didn't understand it at all necessarily.
Because he trusted God and he knew that.
And he knew it was God that was speaking to him.
That's Primi and Gilead Mahus is from this goof is the reason. It's from this precisely this reason. She'enu b'chinas hasoga, she'hasoga tefes ak metzias davar kaneda. Yeah. Lefi she'enu hasoga tefes etzem hamahus. Commission is barleil perek lametes. And for this reason, Chachma is not hasoga, because hasoga comprehension is only the metzias. It's only the what it is. What you know the how do we translate metzias and mahus? It says metzias.
I described to you the painting. You're describing the metzias.
Mahus is from the word mahu. What does it really mean? Like what is the inner neshama of it? So mahus is the inner personality of something. So Bina can explain Elikus, but it's an explanation of something from, like, so to speak, the superficial or external level, metzias of it, that it exists. But to understand Mohus, to relate to its personality in a primistic way,
you have to see it.
Yeah. So that's Asog, so it's not Asog. Because it's not Asog, Tefes Etzem Mohus. In other words, if it was Asoga, as soon as you have Asoga, you lose the Mohus.
Fact.
At the end of the day,
You hold on to both.
No.
You go back to it.
Hold on, 1 second. Later, he for sure says that Chochmah could be Meir and Bina, but that's later.
No, we learned that
you go back
before.
to it.
We learned that before. We learned that before.
Yes.
Chachma is on every level.
Exactly, we said before. You go back to that
100
point.
pages ago.
You constantly have to remind
You
yourself.
must see here what he's
You have to
doing
remind
here.
yourself of that point.
You see here the Rebbe Rashab literally going back and forth the interface to this side, back to this side. Is it, and then so, and now he goes back again. Why is it called Hashra? Hashra means it hovers, like Hashra Shashchina. It's not internal. So that's an important point. It's like Makivdik. Back again, the other way. So it's not like seeing with mamish with your eye. It's only like seeing the ein haseichel. It's like a chacham ein bereishay. The wisdom, the eyes of a wise person are in his head. So it's not mamish muchshis. It's one step away from that.
You see it by
So it's only hashra.
When Yale talks, these things, you see that he sees it. He's describing something that he sees in his head.
You ever look at his eyes?
Come on.
But gam like kamei la'asid, and it's also not like how it'll be la'asid love in the future. Sheyeh b'chinas hasoga v'hasoga tia atzmis. That's when Chachma and Bina will become one, and one with it. Then it will be hasoga Bina. In other words, understanding v'hasoga tia atzmis, and you have hasoga in atzmius, not just mitzias. But that's la'asid love. Kumoishan is boyer le'il peder kuf samach dalad. He says peder kuf samach beis or peder reish chav zayin. Mamish seichening alts. Okay, it's gewaldig. To look in those places to really get it. So that's la'asid. Okay, but today, so what we have is like this. It's Riyah, but it's not Riyah Mamish. That's why it's Hashra. So back and forth. So it's Erein Sof, but it comes in Pnimiyus and Chachma. But not Neifan of Hasoga, only in Neifan of Hanocha or Riyah. And that itself...
Hashra is more internal than hovering. Hovering is Berachefes.
Yeah, Shra is...
but sometimes in Tanya he calls Hashra Makif. When he speaks there, the word from Savos Aravosh, Sheira. Yeah. It's levels. Lefierech, Merachefes is higher than... But Hashra, Legabi Slapshus is... He doesn't use Makif, it's true, but it means it's not completely internalized.
When it's together. It'd be called the Makif the Bina, and it's together, both things in us and love.
I don't know. Makif from the Bina is still Makif. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
He's
Bina.
still living in a sukkah.
Yeah, it's Bina.
You want to sleep in a... I see you really want to sleep in a sukkah. Have you have Makif from the Bina?
I don't know if they catch it.
Why don't you ask a better question? Why can't you sleep in a sukkah, have makif from the bina while you're sleeping? What do you mean you can't sleep? It's so bislapshus by you. You don't have that. Okay. Now it goes back again. Even though it's not ein seichel mamish, it's still riyas hamahus. You're still seeing the mahus. Back to Moshe. We said Moshe v'nachnu ma, the kamei b'Moshe like by Moshe, the agam, then the ksiv upon lo yaro. Even though it says my face you will not see, makom malkim nemer boy vayar reishislei. It still says that he showed him reishis, his beginnings.
You remember that from the Rabbi? How does that?
Yeah. That you see through not looking. Yeah. Upon through lo yaro. You know it. You remember?
I was there and I couldn't believe it for years afterwards.
It's by the way.
It's upon him office.
The mock is upon him office.
The Rabbi said it's upon him office?
No.
Oh.
I thought it was Rabbi's
I checked it
No.
out. You told it. You checked it
in
out.
Kisisa, right? He says it beferish.
Yeah, he says it.
Meredik, right?
What's the word?
I found it later in Panim Yofis. Panim Yofis. Yeah. In Panim Yofis, and Pasha Kisisa says it. We didn't say it because we didn't know at the time. He says it mamish, but Panim Yofis says it. I also thought it was a chiddush. I explained it here already. It says in the pasuk where he asked the Eibush Areini no chvedecha. Show me your glory. Basically, show me your face. The Rambam explains. Meaning, show me your etzem, your muhus. So the Eibush says, Lo yireni odem v'choy, nobody can see me and live. But then he continues with Isay, I'll show you my back, which means my chetzenis, I'm mitzias, keshel. But I mean, but the chetzenis of elikus, not the primi, not the face. But panai lo yiro, and my face will not show. So the Rebbe asked a few questions. First of all, why does he have to rub it in? The Eibush said already, Lo yireni odem v'choy. He has to add panai lo yiro again. Secondly, Moshe asked something. Moshe was a smart man. He knew that if you can't see, you can't see. He also knew you can see God, you can't live. So what did he want? And how could the Eibush not fulfill his bakasha? Yeah, well, that was the question. The Rebbe's answer, it says that you're supposed to read it like this. I will show you my back and my face, but the upanai, you'll see through lo yaro, by not looking. You see, it's making extrapolation. Like Yiddish Hashlila. And like he says in the Kuteri, Yiddish Hashlila can come to almost like Chiyuv. In other words, I remember it also vividly. I wrote it. Yeah, it was Meredik first. But upon Panim Yofis, later I found it, and that was that. I don't think it's second. I'm almost sure we didn't have it there. I just reading, I couldn't believe it. Panim Yofis is very good. He's a chassid. Yeah. So the Panim Yaro, nevertheless it says Vayar Reishislei, that he'll show him Reishis, the beginning. Umashakosa Panim Yaro. So what means Panim Yaro if he showed him Reishis? The Chayla here can type that word. Hayna b'derech nevuah. Shuzel kamei riyas ha'ayin. In other words, he'll show him riyas ha'ayin, so he did see. But ponai in a ifan of nevuah, of riyas mamish, as if you're seeing with that not. The Rebbe's pshat in Panim Yofis is higher than this. That even the mahus you could see by not looking. But it's also not looking means bittul basically. Shul kamei riyas ha'ayin. In other words, why shouldn't you be able to see riyas ha'ayin? Because today you can't see riyas ha'ayin. Okay. Remember, the bottom line is again, the zichuch, the refinement of the world will be such that the interface is complete.
Yeah,
so you can mamish see then. The problem is today, because the world is still a yesh. That's because, and you want you need a proper mamutzu, so you can't. If it's real mamish, it's back to it's not on the level. You need constantly.
You want it
unbelievable. In other words, everything always needs a little piece of velt and a little piece of elikus, and that's it. And here, what's missing is Ayin Mamish. That's what Panele Yaro.
Smell. Until that happens, we have smell.
I lost you.
He said because that was not corrupted by the Etzadas. You have to understand that language. That means that the smell was never. The symptom didn't affect smell.
It's the brain tissue right there.
But that's what we learned about the Shifra, right?
Lilitzer, everything would be
Remember?
Lilitzer, that everything over here in this world would be because there wouldn't be any constant.
Then there'd be no tzimtzum. You don't need a tzimtzum. That's the problem. If there was no tzimtzum, the veld could never emerge because Elikus is made. Yeah. So And through this, the Ein Sof is made in Chochmah. He's going back to that. Remember, through this is the strong bittul, the strong nullification or selflessness and sublimation. Assimilation is the right word, right? Yes. I wouldn't use assimilation here. Assimilate is, huh? No, I know, I understand. But the assimilation I would use more for the midas is assimilating. But anyway, acclimating. Okay. So bittul yes begins chachma, and it begins bittul atzmi mamish. The chachma is a bittul atzmi mamish. Mamish a bittul pnimis and atzmi is the bittul essential bittul begins a mitzvah. She'ena begins mitzias to atzmi klal. Back to the other side, that it doesn't have any mitzias for itself completely. However, it's still a kayach pnimi. It's still not Ein Sof itself. It still has an element of chochmah in it, which is riyah or hanocha, but it's not riyah's ayin mamish. In other words, it's still a faucet. It's not pure divinity. It's complete bittul. So in other words, it's basically how a lakus comes into the kayach pnimi, which will allow that to become the interface to bring it to all other kayachas pnimim into the world. That's the key here. So chochmah is a critical piece. Take out chochmah, and there's no bridge. The bridge is broken. This is also what we say that chochmah is isagdus. Now he's going to a new thing. It's isagdus mamish. It's one with Ein Sof. The iyu v'chayu ichad. The b'chinas chad mamish. That he, iyu, atzmus, alakus, v'chayu, and his sometimes enchiyu is edus, sometimes it's meichen. We learn that. They're one. God, iyu, he, and v'chayu, and in this case, it's talking about chochmah, b'chinas chad mamish, are one. So zo gam kemachim b'chinas ariyah de chochmah. This too is because of the riyah of chochmah. Kuidua ha-mashal, like it's known the mashal, Mahariya be'ezed davar kamari be'ezed tzir. Mashal, an example, that when you see anything, like you see a beautiful painting, beautiful image. Shemisachet v'nidbeg nafshi b'zeh. When you look at it, your soul, your spirit becomes one and cleaves to it. Sachet becomes one v'nidbeg, it becomes like cleaves. B'zeh. At shekol chushav navodim b'zeh. Until all your senses are lost in the image. It's like when you get absorbed by an unbelievable, beautiful, like a beautiful painting.
Lost is the right word.
Yeah, lost.
Because they're lost.
Yeah.
The Hushim don't exist.
Exactly. Right. Eis mitzias. That's the whole point.
If it's a soge, then you're not going to get it.
Right. As soon as you stop thinking, as soon as you feel that I'm thinking about it, or you're telling somebody, you're not in it anymore. That's what we said. When you're absorbing, you can't be transmitting. And that's the inyan of bittul kol mitzias. He's giving a beautiful example of what means losing yourself. It's also not for Yechidus Gula. Everybody has this. Everybody can become absorbed in something beautiful, where you're completely done. You're not conscious of yourself at the moment. You're not thinking that you're thinking or seeing it. You are it. You are in it completely.
So you start thinking that.
See, sometimes this is the way Das is explained, but okay, I guess it's time for Chochmah. So this is the Riyah of Chochmah. Actually using the mashal of Riyah. So power of seeing something, that's he's explaining now what means to see. To see means to be completely absorbed, which is complete bittul of the metzias of you and your chushim. And because of this, what's this? Let's just summarize this. That chachma is called metzius is bittul. And that bittul is a keli for Ein Sof that's higher than chachma. That's what poils the bittul and the chlish's midas. The midas sense the bittul of this chachma. In other words, through meichin, the bittul sense something higher than meichin. Hey, you can sit here. Oh. Because meichin is a keli for all of this. Bittul midas. In other words, when midas meet meichin, they don't just see meichin. They sense in meichin a whole other reality. This whole bittul and this whole thing of elikus. So you see, it's both. The interesting thing is that with back and forth, it's both chachma and it's all beyond chachma, which is what really bittul is. What does bittul mean? That you bottle something higher than you, but it's you that's being bottled. Chachma mamish is bottled. Chachma is not being forced to be bottled. Chachma is the Metzias of Bittul, Koyach Ma. But when you're Bittul, you're automatically a Keli for something above you. And Midas sends that. So it's both Chachma and Pnimius. It's not, so in other words, it's both outside of Chachma and within Chachma. So that really makes the real interface powerful.
So the Midas aren't energized anymore. So they just
Yeah, think of it this way. Let's think the contrast. Make believe that you didn't have the concept of ideas. That it's hard to imagine. But imagine, the only thing you had, everything started from Bina. You learn something, right away you're getting into understanding it. You don't have that spark, like sensing, hey, where'd that come from? You know, an idea falls in you, conceiving an idea. Just for a moment, imagine that didn't exist. Then you wouldn't have in Seichel the element of Bittul. The fact that that suddenly an idea comes to you, and you know that idea didn't come. Where did it come from? You know, where did that idea come from? You sense a ma. You almost like a spark. Like where did it come from? That where? What is that? Ma prishpashta. Because it is a keach primi. It's a keach ma. Remember, it's ma in a keach. He says clearly, it's not elikus per se. It is a keach primi. It's one of the esokechas. It's the beginning. It's think of it like think of it like the tippa, like the seed. It's still completely taken and absorbed with what's higher than it, but it's now not higher anymore. It's not keser.
So you're saying it's not a bittul, it's called chachma because it's a kayach.
Absolutely, it's one of the keiches. It keeps going back. It's a keich primi.
But it's bittul.
A keich that's bottle. But it's a keich that's bottle. It's not the bittul itself. Okay.
This would be like Chabad Shabbat. That would be bottle that you go out.
No, it's not Chabad Shabbat. It's Chabad Shabbat Chabad. It's Chochmah Shabbat Chochmah. It's not talking about unique Ibur. Okay, so that have to do. ומשום זה פועל אחר בכן זה בדיוק חזמן. בפרט לפי מה שנסבר לי על פרק ריש גימל.
So the Midas never recover? For that second, there's weak Midas.
Not that second, it's Elam Atikun. It's forever. The Midas and the Midas.
Of a chachma, whatever it is, you have a chachma. And then the Midas lose their energy, so to speak, and they never recover when you
because Chachma dominates in Elam Atzilus and Elam Atikun. In that world, that's what radiates. That level continuously radiates, and through the whole world. Right? Exactly. Because in the worlds, remember, even though every world has 10 spheres, but generally speaking, Abba Mekan and Atzilus, which is Chachma, is the real power of Atzilus. Bria is Bina. That's how it goes. And Yitzir is the Midas, and Nasir is the thing Malchus. B'frat lefi mashin is boil perek reish gimel, especially specifically according to what we learned earlier, chapter 203. The nefesh adam be'etzem ub'chinas chachma. The nefesh adam be'etzem is the level of chachma. Even though chachma is not the atzmus hanefesh, it's not the essence of the soul. But dafka the atzmus is the cause for chachma. So in other words, we have 10 keiches. We have etzem hanefesh. But like I said before with the reservoir, the faucet is not the reservoir. But it's coming, without it, the drops of water coming out are coming from there. So a drop of water is not all the water, but it's coming directly from it's caused by that.
Concentrated form.
Yeah, whereas Bina would not even be, let's say, the water. Bina may be the Keli or whatever, or Bina is already another, concentrated and diminished. It's a drop. It's only one drop. It's like the Keich HaMaskil, which has all the ideas, and Chacham is one idea.
It's diminished in Kamas, not in Echos.
Probably both, because it's still not Kesed. It's ultimately lower. It's not Riya Mamish. Remember, as soon as it's not Riya Ein Mamish, that's also Echos. That's not just Kamus.
It's natural water.
I'm just giving a morsel of the water, but I'm saying here, the Riya Sichli and Riya Mamish, Mukshis, is an Echos difference. But everything in Ruchnis is Echos and Kamus. There's no just Kamus there. The Midas ime Yeshu is Galus Atzmius, and Midas, even though they're also there's Galus, they reveal the Atzmius of the Nefesh, the personality of the Nefesh. L'kamoshin is bar little Perek Nation of Aleph. Shezeu is Galus Ashtosha Pshutish of Nefesh, like we learned earlier in Perek Nation Aleph. That Midas is this Galus of the roots. Remember, we said that a person was born a Ish Chesed. That's his nature. You can't change that. That's also coming Atzmius HaNefesh. Hadin is bar Leil. Nevertheless, we explained earlier in Perek Nation Beis Shezeu Kamoi B'chinas Haratzon. That's like the power of will. the level of will. So it's coming from the nefesh, but it's like the will of the nefesh. The midas are. And that's why there's a dominance of the shlita of chokhmah over the midas. Just like there's a dominance, a governing, a shlita, authority of pleasure, of desire over ratzon. Same way there's a shlita chokhmah over midas. He's basically he's just tying it all up and saying, so even though midas reflect the root of your personality in the nefesh, but that's like ratzon. In chokhmah, on the other hand, it's not just reflecting the root. Chokhmah is a manifestation of the etzem and the bittul of the etzem. And varai midas don't have bittul, and they do. So it's similar to the shlita, the authority of the tainug desire over ratzon. L'fishu pnimi imeyeh shnei matzmin, because tainug is pnimi, whereas ratzon is chitzeni, even though both of them have atzmim. That's what he's saying. So pnimi always has more dominance. So pnimi, okay. Ukashem shebetainug.
Say that again. Pnimi always has more than we did a minute ago. We were just saying makif is before.
No, it's true. But here he's speaking. Makif has the higher makif, like ratzon, has more power. Not power. Ratzon can force itself upon moichin and midas. You can will, not your will is stronger. But we're talking here we're not talking about forcing yourself. We're talking about more affecting, influencing. So Pnimi will have a more power of influence than the Makiv does. Makiv can control, like a king, authority has a stronger, he's out of strength, but not out of influence.
This won't bear in mind between Arik and Atik.
Arik is Ratzon and Atik is Tainug.
Chokhmah
Stema is an Arik, right. It's Chokhmah Stema, if you remember Chokhmah Stema has two parts to it.
Right.
One is Atik, and one is the Chitzenius. One is Ratzon and one is Tainug. Here we're talking of Chokhmah, obviously the same two things. But here we're talking Chokhmah is Keich Pnimi. So Keich Pnimi is going to affect, so Midas are Pnimi. Keich Pnimi will affect the Midas because it has that bittul and has that Ayin Sof. Okay. Now the parentheses, and that concludes the Perek. Ukashem shebat tainug v'ratzon ein shlita la tainug l'shanis etzem haratzon, and like just like it is with desire and will, that desire does not have the power, and ein shlita la tainug l'shanis etzem haratzon l'reitzel l'reitzel. Desire does not have the power to change the etzem ratzon. You can't change the personality of the will from wanting to not wanting. You can force it to do what you want. Desire can, but it cannot change. The will doesn't change. He's comparing that also to Gam v'chachma gam shepoel chlishus b'midas. Same thing, chachma. Even though it affects and weakens, diminishes, tames the midas, nevertheless, that doesn't mean that's not that it changes the midas completely, their personality, as we discussed. It weakens them, doesn't change them completely. Be'etzem mahusam, in their essential personality. Shariativis makom makom nishar, because their nature still remains. Commission is bar leil pedik reish nun aleph. The gambi spilus hamidus ayidei sechel, and also when midas have his spilus, they have their excitement. There's more than excitement. Gambi spilus hamidus. Hispalus hamidus, gam hispalus hamidus. Idea seichel. When the midas are what? How do you say hispalus? Are stimulated and excited. Not always a pure excitement. Idea seichel. Yochelius is gabes hamida achakach. So even when the midas have hispalus, as we learned earlier, the midah can afterwards come back in full force. Commission is ball peirik neshim gimel, like we learned before in peirik neshim gimel. But you see, Zmam is tying together all the prokim here. So it would be really interesting to see how, because he's like concluding this section. So, but Tom.
Yeah, we learned an hour ago that there is a permanent diminishment of the media. Number one has mature, number two has resolved.
Let me just finish and I'll explain one second. Vatamshin is boisham bepeirik reish beis, And the reason that it's explained there in Perek Reish Beis, Shayach Gam Kan b'Chachma Midas. And the reason that we explained there back in that Perek is also Shayach here in Chachma Midas. The Chachma hu sheba ha'atzmus b'koyach, shul chutz la'atzmus. Because Chachma is a koyach. Remember, it's a faculty that's not atzmus of the nefesh. It comes outside of the atzmus. V'amidas hein is galus atzmus. And the midas are the galus of the person, of the nature of the atzmus. That's the reason. In other words, the reason that we explained earlier why Tainu cannot really change the personality of will. It can control it, but it can't make something that wants not want, or something that not wants want. Same thing, Chochmah can control or weaken the midah, but it doesn't fundamentally change the nature of the midah. The reason for that is because Chochmah is not an atzim. Chochmah is only a koyach of the atzmus. And the midas are izgalas atzmus. So how could Chochmah change? They're both coming from the same place. One is a koyach and so on. U'mekom mokum liyasha be'etzem zeh atzmus mamash al ken yesh b'chochmah shlita lifa. U'mekom liyasha be'etzem zeh atzmus mamash. Since fundamentally this is atzmus. No, it's atzmus rests in chochmah. Basically, as we say, al ken yesh b'chochmah hashlita lifa bitl v'achlish v'amidas. You could tie this two ways. Since midas come from the etzem, you could say that that's why they're affected by the chlishus. Or you could say because chochmah comes from the atzmus, because of bittul, the chochmah has shlita to pel bittul and chlishus. That's probably the way it is. Chochmah has the bittul to affect the weakness. So what he's saying is like this. Rotzen, or Kabbalah say, let's say, Kesed itself without chochmah, can basically, completely by force, like a king's authority, can decree you, even though you want to do something and your inclination is that way, your midas, I decree and don't give you, with my authority, I stop you from doing it. That has absolutely no pneumistic effect on anything. That's just pure imposition. Chachma, because it is not on its own, because it's a keli for Ein Sof, it has that bittul and everything we just learned. Therefore, midas sense it, so the midas get weaker in its presence, because the midas are responding to the elikus. They sense that. It's not meichen on its own, it's meichen as its chokhmah as a keli to elikus. So they get weaker. But since it's coming from chokhmah, it's not like the authority of rotzen. It is definitely more, like we said before, slapshus. Chokhmah does relate more to the midas. Not completely, because it's b'meila, as we said. It happens, maturity happens on its own. But there's definitely yeah. So it's not the same type of imposition. Yet at the same time, it doesn't completely change it either, because the midah is still a midah. It didn't destroy the midah.
Just cliches, but not.
It weakens it. The next step will be, we're going to learn next, is how the midas actually start working with each other. This basically got the attention of the midas, so to speak. It weakened their intensity that existed in Tohu. Yeah. They're no longer the intensity of there. But it doesn't mean they cooperate with each other. It doesn't mean they're coordinated. Hiskalus didn't happen yet. What happened was the chlishus, which was the first step that he said. In Tohu, they're not stable. They don't tolerate each other. So the Eiris don't tolerate eich other. Remember, he even said the Eir even gives, but it gives in a way the other one doesn't have a no. Like that type of thing. But then he's going to explain that once you have the stage set, that the midas are weaker, now the meich and the bina, as he said, can be manig the midas and train them. And that's when the influence starts. But if you don't have the chokhmah to weaken them, in other words, let's put it this way, if you only had a lakus, Ein Sof of Keser, you only can do it by force. The only way would be simple imposition. Chokhmah, through Chokhmah, because it's a pnimi, it speaks the language of the midas, but it's not Chokhmah itself, it's still coming from Elikus. So in other words, Elikus is filtering through Chokhmah, so midas are at bay and ready to listen, so to speak. Yeah, this is Tikkun. This is Tikkun.
Down here.
This is Tikkun. We said clearly. This is Eres the Tikkun, how they work.
That's why the Eres are weaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
The mechanism is not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we finish the Maimon? Let's finish till the end of the Maimon already. So that way you have finished this union. Okay, going back to the pasuk now. Valpi hanal yuva, and according to above, Mashakosov, Vayas kol v'sa'am el Mesha. In the beginning of the Maimer begins, Vayas, he silenced. Kol silenced the nation who challenged Mesha. Pirush Vayas loshen shtika. Vayas is loshen shtika, silence. U'kumei has miponav kol aretz. That the whole earth, the whole land was silent before him. V'yadua the shtiku in a bittel. Shtika is bittel. V'hainu b'chinas chlishus u'bittel hamidus is adei shema. What does it refer to? The chlishus, the weakening, the taming, the diminishing, and the bittel of the midus is there through shema. Ma you'll see is Moshe. V'zeu el Moshe dafke b'chinas shema. V'yas kol av el am el Moshe. Kennst du es nutzen, wo du willst, nach verbringen, etwas Menschen Bolben? You just say, V'yas steht doch, V'yas kol av el Moshe. You know, el Moshe. We come to Moshe, right? Why do you have to mention that? El Moshe to b'chinas ma. So the silencing is a result of the bittul of Keich ma, which is Moshe. Moshe, by the way, is also Esis ma. Mem shin hey, mem hey shin. Hey, by the way, it's because Shema, it says shin, mem hey. Because Shema has the power to create bittul in the midas of Teyu. Go back to the Shema that we've been discussing. The Shema. Shema, that's right, the whole thing was Shema, Shemban. Shema creates the Achdus, okay.
Remember how you started?
Yeah, it's how the whole thing started with the Aleph, with the Shema. Yeah. It was right here. All the way here. Reish Chof Tes, Tov Samach Dalet, page Tov Samach Dalet.
Tov Samach Dalet?
Yeah. Ubire inyan, yesh lahagdim tchila in Shema. V'lechaber shnei hofchim. Unbelievable, huh? So we're talking about 464 to 522. About a good 80 pages. 60 pages, 60, 70 pages. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, well, at least the Rebbe Rashav helicopter. You know, he's rolling along. Shema. V'zel meishu b'chin Shema. Mipnei sheyesh kev b'chin Shema li'vol bittul b'chin Shema. Gam v'yaha shehu meloshen has l'ponov. Right, I know, but what does it mean? Gam v'yahas? Mipnei sheyesh kev b'chin Shema li'vol bittul. Gam v'yahas. Shehu meloshen has l'ponov. It says v'yahas kolov. He does say that. What's the gam? Huh? Right.
Now he's going to explain that. Just finish explaining the first pasuk. We ask Kalav is on Moshe.
Gam v'yashum loshen hasm ponov. The kedim lezek siv Hashem behechel kodshay. Before that says Hashem is behechel kodshay. The Eibush is in His holy hechel sanctuary. V'hainu gilei and so shayemer bebeis hamikdash behechel kedesh hakadoshim. So the beginning of the pasuk says the Eibush that's Gilead Ein Sof. The Gili, the revelation of the infinite divine light that was radiates in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Heichel, in the Holy of Holies. This Gilui Hashem Behechel Kodshay is through the Midas Al Yena Shebehem. It's made through the Midas, through the higher, through the supernal Midas. Yeah, Shebehem. Right, Shebehem v'ayod. I'm sorry, right. Shadei Midas Al Yenis. Shebehem v'ayod Meir Gilei Elokus Lamata Kanal. Through them and Shebehem in them and through them radiates Gilei Elokus down below. The Bizman Abayis Gilei Ein Sof Ayidei Yichud Zun Ponim Beponim, like we learned before. Bizman Abayis, the time of the temple, Beis Hamikdash, there was the Gilei Ein Sof was through Yichud Zun, the unity, the unification of Zon Malchus Ponim Beponim, face to face. Shuzeh Ayidei Ava, that's through Abba Ve'ima. Meir b'zah. That Meichin was Meir completely in Zah, in Midas. B'zeh v'avaya b'hechel kodshe hechel b'gematria Adnai. That's avaya b'hechel kodshe hechel is the gematria of the name Adnai. V'yidur the hecholis harihem malimim machisim ala eir. It's known the hecholis, which are like the sanctuaries, the halls, the hechel, the auditoriums, or whatever you call them. They were like milim. They concealed and covered up on the energy, on the light. U'b'beis hamidrash lo hoya hechel milim. So in general, heicholis, when you have, let's say, a hall or a room that leads you somewhere, so that's not the room itself, it's concealing the room. It's like a antechamber. That's a heichol. But in Beis HaMikdash, the heichol was not mailim, did not conceal. Adrabah, here Gilead and Sof, the Gilead Shem Havaya, B'chinas Ma, the Chochma V'zah. The contrary was the Gilead and Sof through the Gilead of Shem Havaya, which is B'chinas Ma, the Chochma V'zah. That means the Havaya B'heichel Koche. That even in a heichel, which generally is mailim, Adnai, because Adnai is mailim. Adnai is like a lower level, is heichel. So everywhere Adnai is mailim on Havaya. But here it's Havaya B'heichel Koche. Havaya is meir and radiates in Adnai, in the holy Adnai, which is Koche, which is a holy place. And that means that Elokus is meir, not concealed, but it radiates in Chochmeh and into Zah. Yichud Avo, Yichud Zun. Okay. V'zel v'yas kolov. And that's the end of the post. V'yas. And then afterwards it's has miponov kol ha'oretz. That since Havaya radiates in Adnai, in Heichel Koche, so therefore has miponov, everything gets silenced. The whole world gets silenced in his radiance, essentially. What is the meaning? V'zel v'yas kolov. Hainu chlishus hamidus b'chlal liyas bohem habitl. And that's v'yas kolov, that kol of silence the midas. It's a general weakening and silencing of the midas. Liyas behem habitl, that they should have bitl. V'gam she'i al yidei midas hagil lemat liyas habitl ben evroim. That's mepon of kol haaretz. Verstehst? So two things happen here. Havaya radiates, so Chachma is radiating in midas, and so for the midas are weakened and have bitl, because Meichen is made in midas. And the second thing is second half has mepon of kol haaretz. That as a result, there's a bitl in all the elements in the evroim below, which come through midas, because midas is what creates. He's basically really summing up the whole thing. So it's essentially Vayas Kolav is this theme here. It's a theme of the silencing and the weakening of the midas in face of the meichin that through it radiate Elokus, and that brings that bitl all the way down to upon of koloretz, so everything gets silenced. So the silencing of the midas brings the silencing of everything. No, it silences the midas of human beings and their yeshus, and the world gets somewhat tamed. Yeah. Yeah. V'kol zayde Meisha, and all this is through Meisha, Shem bechin Shem Ma, because Meisha is that ultimate bittul. V'hoy is ayde Kolov, and all this happened through Kolov. He was a shliach. Shu begematria Eliyahu, begematria Ban. Kolov is gematria Eliyahu and gematria Ban. If you do it, Eliyahu bechin Ban Dema. Eliyahu is the level of Ban Dema. Now, what's Ban? Remember, Ban is Tayu, is the Midas. Ban is Gematria Behema also, Nefesh Habamis. So, Ma is Gematria Odom. So, Ma is Bittul, Chochma. Ban is Midas, or Midas the Tayu. And he's going to explain it, that Kolov is the one that brings the Bittul of Moshe to the rest, to the Midas, because Kolov is Gematria Ban, he's Ban Dema. He's like the Midas within Meichen. Al-Ken Ha'i B'chil is Kolov L'chabareis on the Shema, right to the interface. So, Kolov is an interface here. That's why Kolov had the power l'chabareis on the Shema. He was able to unite them. Then what? The midas l'Shema de Moshe, or here the Bnei Yisrael, Am Yisrael, because Kolov said it to Bnei Yisrael they were mutiniering, they were complaining that the land is not good, by the Meraglim. Kolov is ban, ban dema. Yeah, but he doesn't say that. Lev as midas, yeah.
In this case, Moshe would be like the neshama. The Bnei Yisrael would be Knesset Yisrael would be like the guf. What something is going to happen in the neshama to the guf.
Exactly. Yeah, that's correct. Or you can say Moshe is the Meichin, Chochmah, and Kolov is the Midas, or it brings the Meichin to Midas, and that B'meila is Mevatel the Kol Haaretz. Yeah, Bnei Yisrael as they are Lamata. I mean, it's essentially the same thing. It's all the same levels. I mean, you could also say Knesset Yisrael is the Midas as they are without any hadracha, because they got emotional about it. The Meraglim rates them on Eretz Echel Sheshvan, so they became crazy from it. They started crying, etc. So they spilus, and the Meichin is Meisha. So Kolov brings the Meichin to sublimate the Midas. It's basically the mamutza between Meisha and between Ma and Ban. That's Ban de Ma. Eliyahu Hanavi.
He didn't do such a good job, did he?
Yes, he did.
No,
because I'll tell you why.
All on island.
Hey, doctor, because he says, because the meter goes back to its regular thing afterwards. It could go back after his pilots. At the moment, He silenced them. It says he silenced them.
That was before they came back.
Yeah, he silenced them.
Just worked for a moment.
Or no, not just for a moment. That's why the Rebbe explains that the Meraglim, that later Kolof sends Meraglim himself in the Haftarah. He does? Okay.
So there was before and after.
Yeah. Bottom line is there was a Vayas. He did silence them at least for that moment. There was a Chlishus of Midas. It actually fits beautifully because the Eden Taka had Bal Midas, and the Midas here were Takef HaMidas against because they got scared. The Meraglim raised them on. So the Midas got the better of them. So they forgot that the Eibishter promised them Eretz Yisrael. So Vayas Kolov, Kira Bittel. We call that the Al Kenoi B'Cheles Kol L'Chaber Eslam Shemad Demesher Shem B'Chinas Habittel Shiyeh B'Chinas Habittel V'Gam Be'al Yoksiv V'Heshav Levavis Al Bonim Lev. Also by Eliyahu it says that he will return the heart of the parents on their children or through their children. Basically, Eliyahu does the same thing. You see, Moshe is Ma. Eliyahu is Bandama. He's able to take Ma and bring it to a lower level.
Because he has both components.
Right. Samach Vav and Achedush, he also speaks about it, yeah.
That's why he was, the Ibud was longer by the
Right. V'zehoya tshuva l'tainas hameraglim. Oh, that's right. And this was the response, the answer to the argument of the Meraglim, to the scouts. Sh'omru efes ki ozah. Efes, nothing. We can't do anything. The nation is too strong for us. The nation, the Canaanites. Ki chaziku. They're too powerful. The hainu teikef hamidas the teo. Oh, they're the midas the teo. The Canaanim. The hainu, they're scared of it because it's the midas. They're such intense midas. They were so intense. They were giants. They were gebedim.
They won't be able to break them.
Take them exactly. Eretz say that. Al zeh heishiv lehem kolav shebekeich shema lasses be'machlishes ba'bitl. Nah. So that's what Kolav tells them. Answers Kolav responds. The keich of shema of Moshe of bitl. It can pile in them a weakness and a bitl. Don't be afraid. So they were afraid because it's such intensity of Teikef Hamidus of Teo. And Ba says, no, don't be afraid. This goes back to what we said before. And not through Kabbalah sale. Not through retreating. The Meraglim wanted to retreat into the Midbar and say, we can't handle Elam Hazah. It's too intense for us. He says, no, you have to go. So and you could weaken them. Right.
That's the shit that
yeah, exactly.
build fortifications around.
Exactly. And the answer is no. You could go there and weaken and be mevatel them. V'zeh ki yochel nuchel. And that's what Kolav says. Yochel, yeah, we can. Yochel nuchel. Hayne b'chinas ha'chlishus b'chlal. That's in general the chlishus. The whole pasuk he analyzes here. In other words, we can. We have the power to deal with them because we can weaken them. Bittel can weaken them. See, but Zayd gefällt Bittel. That was the whole point. So they think they can't do it. Hasogeh. They're thinking too much. Umasha Omer vayirashno Esa. And then Kolav continues and says, vayirashno Esa, we will inherit them. We'll conquer and inherit them. Hu inyan Yerushas Eres the Teo. So it's not just weakening them. You actually inherit them. You actually harness them. Yerushas Eres the Teo. Shadai de Abirur vayno Isaskos b'chinas Shema Lavarash b'chinas Islapshus. That's the second stage. Remember, he talked also there's two things: weakening and changing. So once you can weaken through bittul, you could also yerish them. Yerushas Eres the Teo. Through the birur. And that's through Ma is actually works and is mavarer. Ma refines and eslapshus. There's the idea where Chochmah actually works with the, or Bina works with the midas. V'hainu neged beis b'chinas bitl hanal. The b'chinas shtika b'chlal, this is, which means that it's connected two types of bitl. The b'chinas shtika b'chlal, b'chinas has, meponov, emer. One second. V'hainu neged beis b'chinas bitl hanal. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You have to read like this. Two levels of bitl. One level is b'chinas shtika b'chlal. That's one level of bittul. Silencing them, that we can weaken them.
No, it's two different.
What?
It's two different psukim there. One is Kalev, and the other one is Hasmapon of Kalaretz. It's two different levels.
No, I don't think he means that.
Because he said before that by Kalev is Shtika, the Yas is Dim Shtika, that's by Kalev.
And Hasmaponov is V'yashno?
It permeates, it goes, it's not the Adnai, like Shem Havaya is an Adnai, it doesn't conceal it. Right in the beginning.
I know. 1 second. So you're saying that Vayas, Melosha Shtika, is the first step, weakening the midas through bittul, b'chlal, chlishus b'chlal. And Hasm Ponov is the second step, is V'yirash Noisa.
That brings about the union of a husband.
Okay, maybe that. Hainu neged beis b'chinas bitlan. B'chinas Shtika b'chlal, that's one. B'chinas Hasm Ponov is the second. And that's, so he says, Eimer V'yirash Noisa b'chinas birra prati. V'yachal nuchalav b'chinas hachlishus b'chlal.
Those are the two things.
Okay, so one is the general chlishus of shtika b'chlal, and the second is hasm pon of kol haaretz, that you actually can conquer and inherit them in a birur prati, in not klal but prati. V'yochel nuchel la b'bchinas hachlishus b'chlal. And yochel nuchel is the general chlishus. Yeah, also kol, yeah. Yeah, but remember, haspanov is not kol of. It's all to explain the word vayas. That's why I don't understand.
Yeah, from the beginning, it's two different levels.
Shtikli na bittel. Okay, fine. Okay, but come on, Yachal Nuchel goes back to Chlishus B'chlal. V'zeu ki Yachal b'derech nesinas tam ki Yachal Nuchel. That's what it says, ki Yachal, in the way of a tam, it gives it like a reason. Don't be afraid of them because we could conquer them. Why? The Masha Yachal Liyas Habir Prajal Adei Sheyesh Tchila Chlishus B'chlal. To see the pasuk, but it's mashma because of the silence b'chlal. Vayas, yeah, that's why ki yachal nuchel. So it's like that's the tam. It's not because you have vayas, because you have the bittul of Moshe Ma that can weaken the midas b'chlal. That's why ki yachal nuchel. That's why we can go and befrad be mavara them. That's what he's saying.
What does that mean in real terms? We're talking about the soul and shtik and this and that. But we're talking about other people. How does it that because we connected to Hashem, we'll get extraordinarily strong and beat them up? I mean, how does it work in real life?
No.
If they would have listened to and did the right thing, how would it be?
Let me. I'll spell it out. Let me just finish till the end here. Let me finish till the end because I want to see everything he says here. So therefore, that's a giving of a reason. That the reason, since there's a general silencing in the bittul, therefore, it gives the reason that you can then go in and actually conquer and refine the details of the land. In detail, and conquer it.
It shouldn't be myelin.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be myelin. It shouldn't be
No, not being myelin. Not only not being myelin, also yedish to tell you actually harness it. One thing is not being myelin, but it's also harnessing. It's not myelin. Look, it goes like this: you weaken the midas the tayo through the chlishus and through the bittul. Yeah, but applying it now to Eretz Yisrael, they went in to be able to harness the Eretz the Tehu. But that's not Hachai B'Hechel Kodesh. It does not talk about Eretz the Tehu.
Something becomes yours. It's no more a foreign. It's not more foreign.
Hachai B'Hechel Kodesh is just explaining the level, the second level of there's no halomas. But then comes another thing. There's called Yeshim Birur the Tehu. In the pasuk B'Havai B'Hechel Kodesh, it doesn't talk about Tehu necessarily. Here he is. Here you can harness. Not only don't you be afraid of these takeoff of the midas of Oza'am and Eretz Chelis and so on, but because you actually can conquer it. Yeah, you obviously get rid of the Helam, but you could also conquer it, and that those areas become yours. Yeah. So, okay. U'masha Omar, and Masha Omar, Imeimer Lonu Lasu Sulamis, and what Kolov then said, Imeimer Lonu Lasu Sulamis, they should build ladders. What's the lashon there? What does it say?
Meishu would tell us to make.
We have to do everything possible, everything. Yeah, that even if he tells us to build the sulam, what's a sulam? What's a ladder? That's the level of reusa deliba, the deep desire inside the heart that's higher than tambadas. Sheesh gamkin betikin, but who in yeresh v'resh magia shamayim? Because it says by Yaakov, sulam mutzavat v'resh magia shamayim. So in other words, he's adding now that in tikkun there's another level. The level of Reusa Liba Shalamayla Matam Badas. That he didn't discuss in the previous Perek. And maybe that's the level of Eri and Sof. Okay. That also is in Tikkun. And that's the Inyan of Reishe. The head of the ladder, the top of the ladder reaches heaven. Rak Shebetikkun Gam Zeu B'chinas Habitla De Shema B'chlal. Like the Agdomas Havedish Shal Bitam Badas. Only thing is that in Tikkun, even this level of Sulamis, in other words, the Sulam, what he's basically saying is like this. That Moshe, gives the power to sublimate even the takeoff of midas of Teu. So weaken them. That's one. More than that, that then gives us the power to go in and conquer and yerish the Eretz the Teu. Then he's saying even more. That if Moshe even tells us to build ladders to heaven, which is even more than conquering the land, which means going even Rusa the Liva Lamayla Mitam Vadas, we could also do that. But all that is in Tikkun. That also comes because of the bittul to Moshe, and through the Hagdama of the lower levels of Aveda Pitam Vadas that we've been discussing. So in other words, Moshe is giving us power. The power of Moshe, the bittul gives us power. All back to the interface, not just to reach. And that's what he means. That if Moshe tells us, the Rebbe tells us, Shema, to build ladders in the heaven, that's how they destroyed the second base of Midas. They built the ladders. What does that mean? That you could also do it because of bittul. What does it mean? Gamzel b'chinas bittul? I'm not sure.
No, you have to do
the
it.
bittul does that. Okay, yeah. This is Vayas Kol. This is the meaning that he's Kol of silence them. The Meraglim argued that the nation is strong. B'chinas hamidus the Teu. They're strong, intense midas the Teu. Alzeh Omer Vayas Kolov. Hishtikam b'chinas habitla de Shema de Mesha. Kolov silence them with the bitl of Shema of Mesha. As the Rebbe sagt nicht that. B'zeu ki yochel nuchala begam v'yirashna is b'chinas biru prati. And that's yochel nuchala meken yeh be'efen kloli. He said be'efen chlishus kloli begam v'yirashnu, and that's the reason that you could also go and yerish, inherit, harness, and own these Eidus of Teu, the Taker, because of the biru prati.
Back of the world.
Read the Kitzur. Also, the etzem thing that the midas get weakened is also from Mechem. V'lo yadei hisaskus, as you said in the beginning of the Perek. Not through hisaskus, which is not force. Hisaskus is working with them. Hisaskus training and working with them. Hisaskus is not force. Being involved, like an involvement and investment.
Not through.
Now it's memela. It's through not through working. We said you're mature naturally. Kanida b'chush, as we see reality. We see it in reality that a person matures, and the midas get weaker. Even
he gets beaten up from it, so then he comes up, but he sees himself.
Or just by nature. By nature, an adult is not going to have the same intensity of emotions as a child. For example, you take away candy from a child starts crying. An adult won't. Now, obviously, we can cry for other stupid things, but by nature, there's certain things that are just naturally mature, even on minimal level.
But it's not through experience, just through...
He calls it maturity, through the growth process. How can Meichen do this? The whole explanation that Meichen rests within it the energy of the etzem, the essence of the soul. And the main thing in Meichen that does the Mechlidish Midas is Chachma. The Chachma begins Ma, Bittul Amayla Masaga. Chachma is Ma, Bittul, that's higher than understanding Hasaga, than grasping. Al Ken Sheder Bo Eir Sof. That's why there you rest Eir Sof. Ulechem B'Chachma Bittul Atzmi. And that's why in Chachma you have a fundamental Bittul. Al Ken HaChachma begins Sisagdas Mamish Be'Eir Sof. And that's why, and therefore, Chachma is completely unified, Mamish, unified with Eir Sof. By the Chachma nasa bitl v'chlishus b'midas, and through Chachma becomes the Chachma, through Chachma is effectuated. The bitl, the subjugation and the weakening of the midas. B'frat Chachma harihu ma'atzmas hanefesh, especially because Chachma comes from atzmas hanefesh. Yesh lo shlita ala midas shein is galos hashlosha atzmis. And because it comes from Atzmas and Nefesh, that's why it has a power over the midas that also come from Shlosh Atzmis. That's an akuda that he said that I didn't fully get. Now I understand it. He added there another thing. Besides the fact that midas sense the Elokus, the Eir Sof, in Chochmah and the Bittul, that's why it gets weakened by it. No, but in a sense like what Kolov did. When Kolov said it, he did weaken them all at that moment, because they heard the Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, besides that, there's another thing. Chachma comes from Etzem HaNefesh. Remember, it's the closest thing. Midas also come from Etzem HaNefesh because it's your personality. So Midas understand the language of Chachma a bit because they both come from the same. Yeah. You said it right. But now he in the Kitzur he says in the Kitzur he says Befrat. There he didn't say. So in other words, it's another Nakuda here. Like that's the Taining Ganotzen. That's the similarity to Taining Ganotzen. 1 second, let me just see. Befrat, that is Befrat. Befrat is Mashne Bil. He also says with the Nefesh al Betzim B'chinas Chachma, means Shechom, but at some okay, because he said Tainuk become Chachma, but maybe he says Gal has been commissioned. Okay, it's an additional element. It adds to the interface because they both are rooted there.
The general picture of the thing and the answer.
Yeah. So midas are rooted there. Yeah. In other words, the bottom line is that when you speak to the midas, even if they're wild and everything, and even if you don't change them completely, they understand you. You're not a stranger because they both came from the same place, and now they also sense a lakus. It's almost like this. What he's really saying is like, before the Tzimtzum and before the whole thing started, they were all rooted in Atzmus, in Elikus, no problem. Then the Tzimtzum disturbed everything. It concealed, and everything started becoming personalities. It's like Odom Echad. After the Eight Tzadas, they suddenly felt themselves, they sensed themselves. Now there's a self, an identity. So an Ak or an Kudim, it's fine. The energy is, there's no Kalim. Suddenly tell you, I'm somebody. Since I'm somebody, it becomes intense. I can't tolerate anybody else. The whole thing. In Tikkun, how does that change? What changes is not. You see, they're all rooted really in a good place. That goes back to why our Shit and Chabad is that you could change them, because the midas of Yesh did not come from Klippa. They came from Kedusha once. It's just that it got distorted along the way. The market correction that you need and tell you. So now what happens when midas and Meichen meet? Initially, they're enemies. Midas will tell them what I want to do. Meichen says no. So you have to have a process of education. In other words, the Ibra Yanika Meichen is a process that really brings us back to where you're supposed to be. Right. So what happens is, so this is the several steps here. So Meichen begins to work with Midas. But the Midas don't have chlishas because of Meichen, so the Midas have to sense that lakus in the Meichen, the bittel. When it senses bittel, it does something to them. Something is here. It's like there's something here even if you're not red changed. Then comes Bina is going to go manig them and educate them to change them. And the Birur Proti that he's talking about. And then, because Bina and Chachma really were once neighbors in Etzem, they recognize each other. So, not Bina, Midas and Meichen were both in the Etzem. So Midas, in the sense, they don't know it yet, but they sense that there's a certain connection. Meiredik. It's unbelievable. The truth is, it's Esav and Yaakov. Because they're brothers, twins. They're in Tikkun. They were once, in Shaders they come the same thing. Esav, however, becomes Ishmael Chama, a wild. Esav, Yaakov has to fool him, to train him, because he's not going to do it. So he takes away the Becheda and the Brachas, but his goal is to give it back to him. He's Yiddish, right. To be Yiddish in order to give it back to him, in a sense, but it's harnessed. Because he's not Meichen. Yaakov is Ishtam Yeshiv Ahala, Meichen. Esav is Midas. Ishmael Chama, Yedid Tzayid. He's a warrior.
Actually, Midas comes from a higher level.
Take it, no, for short. Esav is a higher. Teyu says Befedish. Teyu is higher than Tikkun, but Teyu is untamed.
And it's also separated. It's separated.
Right, it does, and Kiravu, right, exactly. It's Midas the Teyu. So Yaakov has to train Teyu, has to train Esav to harness it, and first is through. First he has to actually run away. That's how enemy he is. Then he comes back and first maybe war. And then he goes through, it's a whole process of education. And the Rabbi brings it in Vayeshev Nun Beis, that's Mashiach will come, that's when Esau will finally be ready. The Birur is ready. All these years, Acha Avi, he couldn't go back. He said to him, the children are young and the sheep are tender because they were not yet Kalim for... the Rebbe compares it to why Napoleon couldn't win. Why the Alter Rebbe supported Alexander from Russia, because the takeoff of West, the Western world of Esav was still too strong. And then once they get refined, then we can come and conquer the West. Ishmael is doing for us in Europe right now, and then we'll take over from there. So I see. Okay. One second. So, yes, let me just finish. Therefore, they have a shlita, an authority, a dominance over the midas, because which are these galos of the shlosha atzmis, the rooted. It almost like this: the etzem nefesh releases two energies. One is meichen, which is like the captain. It's reflective. It understands. It's bittul. But another energy it releases are midas, which is your raw, like weeds. They're just raw weeds growing out of your. But so your personality also comes from the etzem, but it doesn't have any discipline. It's just raw, untamed, unbridled. And the meichen, they both came from the etzem, and the meichen now has to do something with this. These two forces have to work with each other.
Why is talking about dominance over the midas? They both came from the etzem.
So he said because they're pnimi.
No, he says about
You're talking about the kitzur or the? One second, let me just the kitzur.
The kitzur he brings it from what he said at the page before.
Yeah, because it's like tainug. He says it's because it's pnimi.
The last line.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we know that whatever is further.
But also pnimi. No, but he said that before. Look in the beginning of the parentheses. He says. No, one second. I'll tell you what I mean. No, earlier. The befrat begins earlier. Befrat, it says, look where the befrat is. Befrat begins before the parentheses. You see? Befrat lefi mashon is bar leo perek reish gimel. But it's boishim zeh begins at times. Zeh atzmus hanefesh v'ataynu chance begins chacham. V'amidas im yesh zeh zgal sankim. That's just pshuta. And it's bar leo al ken yeshlit ma chacham al min k'may sheyeshlit v'ataynu raz lefi shu pnimi. Im yesh shneim atzmim. So that's because it's not mamish clear, but it seems like because tainug is more pnimi than rotzen, even though they're both etzem, and chacham is more pnimi than midas, but also because chacham is the bittul of Ein Sof, of the etzem, and binad and midas don't have the bittul. That's what it comes down to.
Because whatever is lower has a higher shade.
Yeah, shadish, but it doesn't mean it could be gili. The chacham is more exactly. So let's just finish here. Umakol mokim. So k'meishlitus hatainug al rotzen. So Chachma has that shlita on the midas, as the Tainug has the shlita on Ratzon, has the dominance over Ratzon, over desire, over will. Nevertheless, it doesn't change the nature of the midas, like Tainug doesn't, like desire doesn't change the nature of the actual will, because it still remains in its personality. It just weakens it. V'zel vayas kolov, and this is vayas kolov shtika, bittul, v'chlishas hamidus. The silence, the bittul, and the weakening of the midas. El Moshe, ayadei shema de chochma. El Moshe teaches ayadei, through the shema, the bittul of chochma, Moshe. V'zel yochel nuchel, las is chlishas be'eres deteu. And that's we're very capable to create a chlishus in the eres deteu, v'yarashna is ayadei berurim. And then to inherit it, and to harness it through birurim. One second. Now he's going to go next Perek. 1 second, let me just conclude by saying this. The next Perek, he's going to start going into that this chalishus sets the stage for the kalim of tikkun, to fix the kalim of teyu, that there shouldn't be just sevel, they shouldn't just tolerate each other and be weak, but that they should actually begin to receive and give to each other. Remember, mashpia makabel. So it's not just about getting the weak midas tamed, it's about getting them now to start communicate with each other. So basically, when you do counseling, let's say in Shalom Bayis, the first thing is you got to weaken both parties. And then we can start talking. As long as they each think they're all completely right, you can't go anywhere. You got to get them, you're not completely right. And then you can start communicating. Huh? This is pure psychotherapy from my point of view.
So anyway, how would that manifest itself in the actual good?
So we conclude here, Perek, let's say where are we up to? Perek Reish Nun Ches, 258. And we concluded the Maimer Shlach, Tov Reish Ayin Daled, and we're up to the end of the middle, page, Tov Kuf Chav Daled, 524. And the journey continues.